Chapter 1. The Girl in the Window. Katie Simson lived behind a wall of glass. She sat each day in her dimly lit room, gazing out at a world that could never truly be hers. The sunlight, warm and inviting to everyone else, was her silent adversary. The heat of the day would filter through the window panes, refracting off the curtains and casting delicate patterns on the floor. A world she could only ever touch from a distance. It was in these hours, when the world hummed with life outside her view, that she felt the most disconnected. Yet, somehow, also the most observant. Her room, neat but brimming with the essence of her creativity, was a small universe unto itself. Shelves held stacks of sheet music she had composed, and her guitar, her constant companion, rested beside the window. The walls were pale, almost washed out by the lack of natural light, and the faint scent of wood and metal lingered in the air, familiar and comforting. There was a softness to her solitude, an unspoken rhythm to the way she moved through her days, shrouded by an invisible barrier that separated her from the outside world. And then there was Charlie Reed. He had moved in next door a few months ago, though it seemed like much longer. From the sanctuary of her window, Katie had watched him often. His life was easy, uncomplicated, the way hers could never be. She saw him in the morning, leaving his house, running a hand through his unkempt hair, a carefree smile that seemed to belong to another world entirely. He had a way of blending in with the sunlight, moving effortlessly in and out of the warmth she was denied. He was part of that world outside, the one she could never fully reach. Her gaze followed him every day as he mowed the lawn, tinkered with his bike, or sat on the porch reading in the late afternoon sun. She had memorized the way he moved, the small quirks in his gestures, the way he seemed to stretch time with his presence. Katie found herself drawn to the ease with which he existed, a stark contrast to her careful and constrained reality. It was a kind of fascination she hadn't expected, a quiet longing that crept up on her, day by day, until she could no longer ignore it. By dusk, Katie's world became more alive. As the sky darkened and the stars started to glimmer, the weight of her limitations began to lift. She would open her window cautiously, feeling the cool breeze sweep in, a contrast to the stuffy heat of the day. The night, with its stillness and quiet, was hers. It was in those fleeting moments after the sun had slipped below the horizon that she felt a semblance of freedom. The darkness, which confined so many, was her only chance to feel the air on her skin, to hear the world without fear. And it was during one of these nights that she saw Charlie, standing just outside, bathed in the soft glow of the moon. He wasn't looking at her window, not yet. He was simply there, a quiet figure beneath the stars, oblivious to her gaze, but so close she could almost reach out and touch him. Katie's breath caught. Her heart, so used to its slow, measured beats, seemed to quicken, out of sync with the calm night. She leaned closer to the window, her fingers brushing the cool glass, as though some invisible thread had pulled her toward him. The moment was suspended in time, silent, still, yet filled with a kind of intensity she hadn't felt before. In the darkness, with the moon as her only witness, Katie watched him. And for the first time in a long while, she wondered what it would be like to truly know him, not just as the boy next door, but as someone she could be close to. The days that followed seemed longer, heavier with the weight of this newfound curiosity. She continued to watch Charlie, but now there was something different, a fluttering inside her that she couldn't quite define. She wondered if he had noticed her yet. Maybe he had caught a glimpse of her through the window. Maybe he had seen her in the reflection of the night, a shadow watching him from afar. But no, he couldn't have. If he had, he would surely look for her more often. He would glance toward her house, maybe walk a little slower when he passed by, as if waiting for something or someone. Katie sighed. shifting in her seat, her guitar resting on her lap. She plucked a few soft chords, letting the melody drift into the night air. It was her way of speaking without words, her thoughts woven into music that only she and the stars could hear. Her fingers danced over the strings, the notes rising and falling like the pulse of the evening. Outside, the world continued in its quiet, unhurried pace. The occasional car passed by on the distant road, and the faint sounds of summer insects hummed in the background. Time felt like it moved differently at night, slower but richer, as if the universe itself was in no rush to push the hours forward. And Katie, lost in her music, allowed herself to dream. She imagined a life beyond the window, one where sunlight didn't hurt, where she could walk in the warmth of the day, feel the grass beneath her feet, and laugh without fear. She imagined a world where she wasn't bound by this illness, where she could meet Charlie Reed without hiding behind the veil of the night. But for now, all she had was this: the girl in the window, watching a boy who had no idea how much space he had taken in her quiet life. And as the moon rose higher, casting its silver light across the room, Katie played on, the melody growing softer until it faded into the stillness of the night. Chapter 2: Shadows of the Day. The world outside shifted in hues of gold and blue, a reminder of life that existed beyond the protective shade of her home. Katie Simson sat at her window again, this time not watching Charlie but simply observing the day as it unfolded. The sun, bold and unrelenting, swept across the yard, casting long shadows of the trees that surrounded her house. She could almost feel the heat pressing against the glass, a barrier she couldn't cross. Today was just like every other day. The world spun, busy with its own rhythms, and she remained still, a silent observer behind her window. Katie's fingers twitched with restlessness, tapping absent-mindedly on the windowsill. The monotony of it all gnawed at her. The same walls, the same view, the same helpless yearning for something more. She had learned to live with it, but on days like these, when the world seemed too bright, too full of life she couldn't touch, it felt harder to ignore. She turned away from the window and glanced at the clock. It was only mid-afternoon, too early for her to step outside, too dangerous for even a fleeting moment of exposure. Time dragged in the daylight. It always had. The hours of sunlight felt like an eternity, a slow, relentless passage she had no choice but to endure. Katie stood up, stretching her stiff muscles, and walked over to the guitar resting on its stand. The familiar weight of it in her hands was comforting, grounding her in something she could control. Her fingers found their place on the strings, and soon, the room filled with soft, melancholic notes. It was a song she had played countless times before, but it never lost its meaning to her. Each note was a reflection of the quiet ache inside her, the one that swelled with each passing day she spent confined indoors. As she played, her thoughts drifted to the night. It was all she could look forward to, the hours of darkness where she could move freely, if only within the boundaries of her yard. But even that small freedom felt like a gift. The night was her haven, her sanctuary. Under the stars, she wasn't so different from everyone else. The darkness concealed her fragility, her need for protection, and allowed her to exist without fear of the consequences sunlight brought. And then there was Charlie, the boy who had unknowingly become the center of her night-bound world. Katie had watched him from afar for so long now, and though they had never spoken, it felt as though she knew him. She had studied the way he moved, the expressions that crossed his face when he thought no one was watching. There was something unguarded about him, a simplicity in the way he lived that fascinated her. He didn't seem to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders, not like she did. It was as if he belonged to the daylight, effortlessly moving through the hours that were denied to her. Her gaze shifted back to the window, where the sun continued its slow descent across the sky. The light had begun to soften, signaling that dusk was not far off. Soon, the shadows would lengthen, and the world would slip into the comfort of darkness. Katie's heart quickened at the thought. She had seen Charlie again last night, just before midnight. He had been sitting on the edge of his porch, looking up at the stars, unaware that she had been watching him from her window. There had been something peaceful about him, a quiet contentment that made her wonder what it was like to live without the constant fear of the sun. She shook her head, as if trying to rid herself of the thoughts that clung too closely. It was foolish to imagine anything more than what she had. She knew that. But still, the idea of meeting him, really meeting him, not just watching from a distance, stirred something deep inside her. It was a dream she couldn't afford to have, and yet it lingered, persistent and unrelenting. Katie placed the guitar back on its stand and walked over to her desk. A notebook lay open, filled with pages of scribbled thoughts and half-finished melodies. She sat down and stared at the blank page in front of her, the pen hovering just above the surface. The words didn't come easily today. They rarely did when the sun was still high in the sky. Her mind felt sluggish, weighed down by the passing hours and the ever-present feeling of confinement. She sighed and pushed the notebook aside. It was no use forcing it. The music, the words, they would come when they were ready, just like everything else in her life. Patience, she reminded herself. She had learned that lesson well. In her 17 years, she had become an expert in waiting. Waiting for the sun to set, waiting for the night to fall, waiting for a world she could only dream of entering. As the day wore on, the light began to soften. The sky, once a blinding blue, now shifted into a deepening gradient of purples and pinks. Katie stood by the window again, watching as the shadows grew longer, stretching across the yard like fingers reaching for something just out of reach. The air seemed to cool, and with it, a sense of anticipation built inside her. Soon, it would be her time. She glanced across the yard to Charlie's house. His car was parked in the driveway, but there was no sign of him yet. The porch light flickered on, casting a warm glow over the steps where she had seen him sit so many times before. A soft breeze rustled through the leaves, and Katie felt the familiar pull toward the night, a need to be outside, where the air was cool and the sky endless. Finally, as the last rays of sunlight disappeared below the horizon, she opened her window. The rush of fresh air filled the room, and Katie breathed deeply, savoring the feeling of freedom that came with the night. She slipped quietly out of her room, moving through the darkened house until she reached the back door. It creaked softly as she pushed it open, and the cool night air enveloped her, wrapping her in its embrace. Outside, the world felt different. The darkness had a stillness to it, a quiet calm that allowed her to move without hesitation. The stars twinkled faintly above, distant and indifferent, as she stepped into the yard. The grass was cool beneath her feet, the earth solid and reassuring. Katie glanced toward Charlie's house. The porch light was still on, but he wasn't there. Not yet. She walked slowly to the edge of the yard, her heart beating in time with the quiet hum of the night. There was a certain magic to these moments, a feeling of connection to the world that she didn't have during the day. The darkness leveled everything. Here, under the stars, she wasn't different. She wasn't fragile. She was just another girl, moving through the night, waiting for something unknown. And so, Katie stood there, on the edge of the shadows, watching and waiting, her gaze fixed on the place where her world and Charlie's might one day meet. The night was hers, and in its shadows, she found hope. Chapter 3: Stranger at Twilight. The evening sky wore a dusky shade of purple as Katie sat by her window, the light fading quickly into night. The weight of the day lifted from her shoulders as the last remnants of sunlight dissolved into the horizon. Her room, with its quiet hum and soft, shadowy edges, felt like a cocoon, safe, familiar, and waiting to be left behind. She had lived through another day, another stretch of hours confined by the walls that kept her safe, yet distant from the world outside. But now, as the evening descended, her real life began. It had become a ritual, this time of waiting for twilight, when she could finally step outside. Katie leaned closer to the window, her fingers trailing along the glass, which had grown cool with the approach of night. She watched as the world outside shifted in subtle tones of gray and blue, the light bending into the softness of dusk. The trees stood tall and silent, their leaves rustling only faintly in the still air. The quiet felt like a promise, a prelude to the freedom that night always brought. Her eyes, almost instinctively, drifted toward Charlie's house. The porch light hadn't come on yet, but she knew he was there. She had seen him earlier in the day, walking out to his car, a small smile playing on his lips as he fumbled with his keys. Katie's heart had skipped a beat as it always did when she saw him, a fleeting moment of connection that she felt from her hidden place behind the curtains. Charlie lived in the daylight. His world was bright and open, filled with laughter she could only hear from a distance. There was something about the way he moved, the way he occupied space with such ease, that fascinated her. He was everything the sun represented: warmth, light, and life. And Katie, living in her shadowed existence, could only watch him from afar, bound by her invisible chains of fear and necessity. But tonight, something felt different. The air was thick with the scent of earth and growing things, a reminder that summer was still clinging to the edges of the season. Katie's pulse quickened as she stood up from her chair, her bare feet making no sound as she crossed the room. She pulled open the window, allowing the night breeze to sweep in, brushing against her skin in cool, delicate strokes. It was time. Outside, the sky had deepened into a velvety blue, the stars just beginning to peek through the thinning clouds. The world was quiet, but not completely still, the kind of quiet that comes just before something changes. Katie stepped into the backyard, the soft grass cool beneath her feet. She felt lighter, freer, with each step she took away from the house. The shadows clung to her, wrapping her in their soft embrace, protecting her from the danger daylight posed. Her gaze drifted back to Charlie's house. His silhouette appeared in the window for just a moment, a fleeting glimpse that made Katie's breath catch. He was there, just as she had known he would be. She wondered if he felt the same pull to the night that she did, if there was something in the darkness that spoke to him too. The thought made her smile, an unspoken connection between them, though he didn't even know her name. Katie moved quietly through the yard, her steps careful, deliberate. The world outside her house felt vast and alive at night, the boundaries between what was possible and what was merely imagined blurring together in the stillness. She made her way toward the small grove of trees that lined the edge of her yard, a place where the shadows were deepest and the stars seemed brightest. This had become her sanctuary, a place where she could exist without the weight of her illness pressing down on her. As she approached, Katie caught a movement out of the corner of her eye. Her heart skipped in her chest, a sudden flutter of surprise. It was Charlie. He was outside too, standing just beyond the fence that separated their yards, his figure framed by the soft glow of the moon. He hadn't seen her yet. He was simply there, his gaze fixed on the sky, as though lost in thought. Katie froze, her breath hitching in her throat. For a moment, she didn't know what to do. Her instinct was to retreat, to melt back into the shadows where she could remain unseen. But something held her in place. The quiet presence of Charlie, so close, yet unaware of her, felt like a fragile thread that she didn't want to break. He stood with his hands in his pockets, his shoulders relaxed, his head tilted slightly as if listening to the night. Katie watched him, her pulse quickening with a mixture of fear and excitement. He was just there, so close, and yet it felt like they were worlds apart. She wondered what he was thinking, if the night brought him the same sense of peace that it did for her. The minutes stretched on in silence. Katie could hear the soft rustle of the wind through the trees, the faint chirping of crickets in the grass. And still, she stood there, hidden in the shadows, watching him. She felt like a part of the night itself, an unseen presence that was both there and not there, caught between the world of darkness and the life that Charlie lived in the light. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, he turned his head. Katie's heart leapt in her chest. His eyes scanned the yard, as if sensing something, someone. For a brief moment, their gazes met across the distance, and Katie felt a jolt of electricity shoot through her. It was just a flicker, a moment that could have been imagined, but it was enough to send her pulse racing. Had he seen her? Or was he simply staring into the dark, unaware that she stood so close? Katie held her breath, not daring to move. She was so used to being invisible, to living behind the safety of her window, that the thought of being seen, even in the shadows, filled her with both fear and a strange, unspoken hope. But then, Just as quickly as it had happened, Charlie looked away. He shifted, breaking the moment, and began to walk back toward his house. Katie exhaled, her heart still pounding in her chest. She watched as he disappeared into the soft glow of the porch light, the door closing behind him with a quiet thud. The yard was empty again, the silence returning in his absence. Katie stood there for a long moment, her body still as the night wrapped itself around her once more. She felt a strange mix of relief and disappointment, her mind replaying the fleeting moment when their eyes had met, even if only for a heartbeat. It wasn't much. It wasn't anything at all, really. But to Katie, it felt like a shift. Something small, something new. The night stretched on, and eventually, Katie turned and made her way back to the house. She moved slowly, her thoughts tangled with the image of Charlie standing in the moonlight, so close yet still just out of reach. The stars above glittered faintly, distant and indifferent, as she slipped back inside, closing the door softly behind her. The shadows had shifted that night, just enough to stir something inside her. And though the world had returned to its quiet stillness, Katie couldn't shake the feeling that something was beginning to change. Chapter 4. Whispers in the Dark. The nights had begun to blur together, a quiet rhythm of darkness and silence that Katie had grown accustomed to. Yet now, every night felt different, charged with a new energy that had taken hold since the brief moment when Charlie had glanced in her direction. Even though it was fleeting, that single glance had lingered in her thoughts, unraveling the careful distance she had kept between them. It was nothing, and yet it was everything. Tonight, the air was thick with humidity, the kind that clung to the skin and made everything feel heavier, slower. The stars were hidden behind a veil of clouds, and the moon, usually so bright and watchful, was little more than a faint glow behind the haze. The darkness felt deeper tonight, more impenetrable, and as Katie sat by her window, she felt its weight pressing down on her. She hadn't seen Charlie again since that night. During the day, she had watched him through her window, as she always did. But there had been no more late-night walks or quiet moments spent beneath the stars. Katie wondered if he had noticed her watching, if he had felt her presence that night. It was a thought that filled her with both excitement and dread. What if he had? What if he knew she was there, hiding in the shadows, observing him like some distant specter? The possibility of being discovered unnerved her. For so long, she had lived in the safety of her solitude, unseen and unnoticed by the world outside. But now, with Charlie so close, that solitude felt fragile, like it could be broken with the slightest touch. And yet, she couldn't stop herself from wanting more. As the night deepened, Katie finally stood up, her muscles tense from sitting still for so long. She moved through the quiet house, her bare feet making no sound on the cool floor. The shadows clung to her as she made her way to the back door, slipping outside into the thick, warm air. The world was still, save for the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze and the distant hum of insects in the grass. It felt as if the night was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Katie walked slowly through the yard, her eyes drifting toward Charlie's house. The porch light was off tonight, and the windows were dark. A part of her was relieved. There would be no unexpected glances, no risk of being seen. But another part of her felt a deep, unspoken disappointment. She had grown accustomed to his presence, even if it was only from a distance. She wandered toward the grove of trees at the edge of her yard, where the shadows were deepest and the world felt farthest away. The air was cooler here, and Katie inhaled deeply, letting the night fill her lungs. It was peaceful in a way that daylight never was, calm, unhurried, and full of possibility. The darkness had always been her refuge, a place where she could exist without fear or restraint. But tonight, the darkness felt different. It wasn't just a shelter. It was alive, pulsing with something new. Katie could feel it in the air, a subtle shift, like the universe was on the verge of revealing something. She stood beneath the trees, her heart beating steadily in her chest as the night wrapped itself around her. And then, in the distance, she saw him. Charlie. He had emerged from the side of his house, moving slowly, almost cautiously, as though he were searching for something in the dark. Katie's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected him to be out tonight, Not after so many nights of absence. Her first instinct was to retreat, to slip back into the shadows where she could remain unseen. But something held her in place. Her gaze followed him as he walked across the yard, his figure illuminated faintly by the soft glow of the moon, which had just begun to peek through the clouds. He looked different tonight, quieter somehow, as if the weight of the world had settled on his shoulders in a way she hadn't noticed before. Katie stood frozen, unsure of what to do. She had watched him so many times from her window, always hidden, always at a distance. But now, he was here, so close, and the fragile line that separated their worlds felt like it could break at any moment. She watched as he moved toward the edge of his yard, closer and closer to where she stood. Her heart raced in her chest, a wild, unsteady rhythm that she couldn't control. Charlie paused just before reaching the fence that separated their properties. He stood there for a long moment, his head tilted slightly as though listening to the night. Katie's breath came in shallow bursts, her body tense with the fear of being seen. She was close enough now that if she moved, if she even breathed too loudly, he would surely notice her. And yet, a part of her wanted him to. A part of her longed for him to turn his head, to look at her and see the girl who had been hidden for so long. It was a dangerous thought, one that contradicted everything she had told herself over the years. She was supposed to stay in the shadows, to remain unseen, because it was safer that way. Safer for her, safer for everyone. But standing here, with Charlie just a few feet away, that safety felt like a cage. A cage she no longer wanted to live in. Katie's heart pounded in her chest as she took a small step forward, her foot barely making a sound on the soft grass. She wasn't sure what she was doing, wasn't even sure why she was doing it, but something inside her had shifted. The silence between them was heavy, almost tangible, and Katie felt as though she could reach out and touch it. But before she could take another step, Charlie moved. He turned, slowly at first, as if sensing something in the air. Katie froze, her breath catching in her throat. For a brief moment, his eyes seemed to scan the darkness, his gaze passing over the spot where she stood. And then, just as quickly, he turned away, his attention drawn to something in the distance. Katie let out a breath she hadn't realized she had been holding. The moment had passed. She was still hidden, still safe in the shadows. Charlie lingered for a few more minutes, standing at the edge of his yard, his figure outlined against the night. Katie watched him, her heart slowly returning to its normal rhythm. She felt a strange mixture of relief and disappointment wash over her, the two emotions tangled together in a way she couldn't quite understand. After a while, Charlie turned and walked back toward his house, disappearing into the darkness once more. Katie stood there for a long time, the night quiet and still around her. The moment had come and gone, leaving her standing in the same place she had always been, alone, hidden in the dark. But something had changed. Katie could feel it in the way her heart still raced, in the way her body felt alive with the possibility of what could have been. For so long, she had been content to watch from a distance, to live her life in the shadows. But now, that distance felt unbearable. The shadows no longer felt like a refuge, they felt like a prison. As the night wore on and the sky grew darker, Katie turned and walked back toward her house. The stars were still hidden behind the clouds, and the air was thick with the promise of rain. She stepped inside, closing the door softly behind her. The house was quiet, as it always was, but tonight, the silence felt different. Katie stood by the window, her gaze fixed on the darkened world outside. For the first time, the darkness didn't feel like enough. For the first time, she wanted more. And though the night had passed in silence, something inside her whispered that things would never be the same again. Chapter 5. Under a clouded sky. The next few nights were suffocating. The air felt thick, laden with the smell of rain that never came, and the sky above was blanketed in clouds that refused to let the stars shine through. Even the moon was trapped behind a veil of gray, leaving the world below in a state of half-light, the kind of darkness that made everything feel just a little bit more uncertain. Katie sat at her window as always, staring out into the murky night, her fingers tracing invisible patterns on the cool glass. Her guitar lay across her lap, though she hadn't played a note. There was a stillness in the air, not the peaceful kind that usually came with the night, but a tense quiet, like the world was waiting for something to happen. She could feel it in her chest, a restlessness that she couldn't shake. Since that last night when Charlie had stood so close, Katie hadn't ventured outside again. She had thought about it, had even stood at the back door more than once, her hand hovering over the handle, but something held her back. The weight of that moment, when their paths had almost crossed, still lingered in her mind. It had been so close, too close, and now the idea of stepping into the night again felt more dangerous than ever. She had been hiding for so long, living in the shadows, and that small taste of something different had left her feeling exposed, vulnerable. Katie's eyes drifted toward Charlie's house, her heart sinking a little when she saw that his porch light was off again. The past few nights had been like this, silent, uneventful, as though the world had gone back to the way it was before. But nothing felt the same. The memory of Charlie standing just a few feet away, his presence filling the air between them, had changed everything. Even if he didn't know she was there, Katie did, and that knowledge clung to her, refusing to let go. The days were the hardest. The sunlight streaming through the windows felt cruel, a constant reminder of the life she could never have. She watched Charlie from behind the curtains, saw him come and go, living his life in the daylight that was forever out of her reach. He was always smiling, always surrounded by friends, his world so bright and full of warmth. Katie couldn't help but feel the distance between them growing wider with each passing day, like the sunlight itself was a barrier she would never be able to cross. But the nights were hers. And though the air felt heavy and the clouds hung low, Katie knew that it was only a matter of time before she ventured outside again. The pull was too strong. The need to feel the cool grass beneath her feet, to breathe in the night air, was too much to resist. Even if Charlie wasn't there, even if the darkness felt heavier than usual, it was still the only place she could be herself. That night, the world seemed to hold its breath. The wind, which had been teasing the trees all evening, suddenly died down, leaving the air still and thick. Katie watched as the leaves stopped moving, the branches standing silent and unmoving against the darkened sky. It was as if the night had frozen, waiting for something to break the silence. Katie set her guitar aside, the soft hum of the strings fading as she stood up. She moved through the house with practiced ease, her steps light and soundless on the hardwood floors. The familiar path to the back door felt different tonight, as though she were walking it for the first time. Her hand hesitated on the doorknob, a brief moment of indecision. But then the cool metal turned beneath her fingers, and the door swung open with a quiet creak. The night air hit her skin immediately, warm and thick, but with a promise of rain lingering just beneath the surface. Katie stepped outside, her bare feet sinking into the soft grass, the sensation grounding her in the present moment. The world was dark, but not entirely. There was a faint glow to everything, a softness that came from the moon hiding behind the clouds, a light that barely touched the earth but still made its presence known. She moved slowly, carefully, as though each step carried a weight she couldn't quite shake. The trees whispered in the distance, the only sound in the otherwise silent night, and Katie felt herself drawn to them. The grove at the edge of the yard had always been her sanctuary, the place where she could hide from everything, where the world outside couldn't touch her. But tonight, it felt different. The shadows were deeper, the air heavier, and Katie could feel a sense of anticipation growing in her chest, like something was about to happen. As she approached the trees, her eyes drifted toward Charlie's house once again. She couldn't help it. It had become a habit, this constant awareness of his presence, even when he wasn't there. The porch light was still off, and the windows were dark. It seemed like he had already gone to bed, like the night had swallowed him up just as it always did. But then, just as she was about to turn away, a light flickered on. Katie's heart skipped a beat, her breath catching in her throat. It wasn't the porch light this time. It was a soft, warm glow from the window of his bedroom. She could see the faint outline of him moving inside, the silhouette of his figure as he crossed the room. Katie stood frozen, her gaze locked on the window, unable to look away. He was so close, and yet so far, separated by the walls of his house. the light that kept him in his world and her in hers. She felt the familiar ache in her chest, the longing that came with watching him live a life she could never be part of. But then, something changed. Charlie stopped moving, his figure pausing by the window, his hand resting on the frame. Katie's heart raced as she realized he was looking out, staring into the night, just as she was. It was a small thing, barely noticeable, but it felt monumental. For a moment, it was as if the world had shifted, as if the distance between them had grown smaller, even though neither of them had moved. Katie held her breath, her body tense with the fear of being seen, but also with something else, something that felt dangerously close to hope. She watched as Charlie stood there, his gaze seemingly fixed on the same darkened landscape that stretched out before her. He couldn't see her. She knew that. The shadows were too deep, the night too dark. But the idea that he was there, just on the other side of the glass, looking out into the same night, made her feel less alone. The moment stretched on, a fragile thing that could break at any second. Katie's pulse quickened, her thoughts racing as she wondered what it would be like if he did see her. If the veil of darkness that had kept them apart suddenly lifted, what would he think? Would he be afraid? Curious? Or would he simply turn away, his world too far removed from hers to ever truly connect? Before she could think any further, the light in Charlie's room flickered off, plunging the house back into darkness. Katie exhaled, the tension in her body slowly fading as she realized the moment had passed. He was gone again, swallowed by the night, and she was left standing in the shadows, just as she always had been. But something had shifted. It was small, barely noticeable, but Katie could feel it. The darkness wasn't as impenetrable as it had been before. The distance between her and Charlie, while still vast, didn't feel quite as impossible. The night had given her something new, a sense of connection, however fleeting, that made the world seem just a little bit less lonely. Katie turned and made her way back toward the house, the soft rustle of the grass beneath her feet the only sound in the otherwise silent night. The clouds still hung low in the sky, and the air was still thick with the promise of rain. But for the first time in a long time, Katie didn't feel trapped by the darkness. She stepped inside, the cool air of the house greeting her as she closed the door behind her. The shadows still clung to the corners of the room, but they didn't feel as heavy now. Katie stood by the window, her gaze lingering on the darkened outline of Charlie's house for just a moment longer. The night had passed, quiet and uneventful as it always did. But this time, something had been left behind. A whisper in the dark, a promise of something more. And Katie, standing in the stillness of her room, couldn't help but feel like the night had begun to change for both of them. Chapter 6. Beneath the Same Sky. The following nights brought a sense of unease Katie couldn't quite name. The weight of the dark felt different now, heavier in a way that pressed against her as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Her nights were supposed to be her sanctuary, her time of peace, when the world outside fell silent and she could exist freely without the threat of daylight. But lately, the night felt restless, as if it too was waiting for something to change. She hadn't seen Charlie again since that brief glimpse of him at his window, but that moment replayed in her mind over and over until it felt like she could still sense him out there, standing just on the edge of her awareness. She thought of him constantly now, even during the day when the curtains were drawn tight and she sat inside, watching the sun cast long shadows across the yard. Each morning, when the light first touched the edges of the horizon, she felt the world closing in, shrinking to the small space that her disease had allowed her to inhabit. The daylight was a reminder of the life that continued outside without her, a world she could never fully belong to. But at night, it was different. At night, she could dream, and lately, all her dreams seemed to revolve around Charlie. Katie spent hours at her window, hoping to catch sight of him in the dark, but his walks seemed to have stopped, the yard remaining as empty as the sky. Even the moon had disappeared behind thick clouds, offering no light to pierce the gloom that settled over the town. She wondered where Charlie went during the day, what he did when he wasn't inside the walls of his home. The only glimpses she had were the brief moments when he left or returned, his face always turned toward the sun. One evening, After a particularly oppressive day of heat and humidity, Katie could no longer bear the restlessness that had built inside her. The air in her room felt too thick, the walls too close. It was as if the house had grown smaller, the space suffocating her, and she needed to escape before it became unbearable. She slipped on her shoes, more out of habit than necessity, and moved quietly through the house. The familiar path from her room to the back door was worn into her mind, the steps automatic now, as though her body had memorized the way to freedom. The cool night air greeted her as she stepped outside, wrapping around her like a comforting embrace. The sky above was still hidden behind a layer of thick clouds, but tonight, the darkness felt different. There was a charge in the air, a faint hum of energy that buzzed just below the surface. Katie walked slowly across the yard, her feet sinking into the damp grass as she made her way toward the trees. The familiar rustle of leaves in the breeze accompanied her, but there was something else, too. A distant rumble of thunder that seemed to come from far away, like the sky itself was groaning in anticipation. She glanced up at the thick blanket of clouds, wondering if the storm that had been threatening for days was finally on its way. The night felt alive, buzzing with an energy that mirrored the restlessness she had been feeling. Katie wandered aimlessly through the shadows, her mind too full to focus on any one thing. Charlie was there, in the back of her thoughts, his presence a constant hum, though she hadn't seen him. She kept expecting to find him out here, just as he had been that night by the fence, but the yard remained empty, the house dark. She paused near the edge of her yard, the familiar place where the grass met the trees. The shadows here were deeper, thicker, and Katie welcomed them, allowing herself to melt into the darkness. The air felt charged, like the world was on the verge of something, though she couldn't say what. A sudden breeze rustled the branches above, sending a cascade of leaves fluttering to the ground, and Katie closed her eyes, letting the cool air wash over her face. And then she felt it, a soft, barely there sensation against her skin. Rain. It came in gentle droplets at first, just enough to prick at her awareness. She opened her eyes and looked up, watching as the clouds above began to release their burden, slowly at first, and then all at once. The rain came down in a steady sheet, soaking into the earth around her, the coolness a welcome relief against the thick heat of the evening. Katie stood still, letting the rain drench her, soaking through her clothes and into her skin. She had always loved the rain, the way it made the night feel more alive, more connected. It was like the world was being washed clean, the heaviness lifted, if only for a little while. She tilted her head back, closing her eyes again as the water trickled down her face, the sensation calming the storm that had been brewing inside her for days. For a long time, she stood there, alone in the downpour, the rest of the world fading into the background. The only sound was the steady rhythm of the rain hitting the ground, a soothing, steady beat that matched the pulse in her chest. The storm wasn't violent or overwhelming, just a steady release, the kind of rain that felt like it was cleansing the earth. And then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw him. Charlie. He was standing by the edge of his yard, just as she had seen him before, his figure half hidden by the shadows of the trees. The rain had soaked him too, his clothes clinging to his body, his hair slick against his forehead. He wasn't moving, just standing there, staring out at the rain, his expression unreadable in the dim light. Katie's heart leaped in her chest, her breath catching as she watched him. She had imagined this moment so many times, had rehearsed in her mind what it might be like to see him again. But now that it was happening, she felt paralyzed, unsure of what to do. The rain had muted the world around them, the sound of it drowning out everything else, leaving just the two of them, standing in the dark. For a brief moment, Katie thought about stepping forward, about crossing the invisible line that separated their yards, their worlds. It would be so easy, just a few steps, and she would be there, close enough to touch him, close enough to break the silence that had kept them apart. But something held her back, a deep, unspoken fear that if she moved, the fragile moment would shatter, and everything would return to the way it was before. Charlie stood there for a long time, his figure illuminated faintly by the soft glow of the streetlight in the distance. He seemed lost in thought, his gaze fixed on the rain as it fell around him, as if he were searching for something in the downpour. Katie watched him, her heart aching with the desire to reach out, to bridge the distance between them. But she stayed where she was, hidden in the shadows, just as she always had. The rain continued to fall, soaking into the earth beneath her feet, and Katie felt the weight of the night settle over her once again. The storm had brought with it a sense of release, but also a reminder of the distance that still separated her from the world outside. Eventually, Charlie turned and walked back toward his house, his figure disappearing into the darkness. Katie watched him go, her chest tight with the weight of what could have been, what might never be. The rain began to lighten, the storm passing as quickly as it had come, leaving the world quiet and still once again. Katie stood there for a long time, long after the rain had stopped, the night wrapping itself around her like a familiar blanket. The storm had passed, but the restlessness remained, the sense that something was still waiting to be resolved. She turned and made her way back toward the house, her feet squelching in the wet grass, the sound of the rain still echoing in her mind. The night had given her another glimpse of him, another brief connection that left her feeling both closer and further away. But as she stepped inside, the cool air of the house wrapping around her, Katie knew that the storm hadn't truly passed. It was still there, lingering just beneath the surface, waiting for the moment when everything would finally change. Chapter 7. The Weight of Secrets. Katie lay awake in bed, the world outside her window still, the stars obscured by lingering clouds from the storm. The rain had long since stopped, but the air remained heavy with the scent of wet earth and damp leaves. She could still feel the faint coolness of the raindrops on her skin, a memory of the night that seemed to follow her into the quiet moments before dawn. Sleep was elusive, slipping through her fingers every time she closed her eyes. She tried to clear her mind, to sink into the familiar rhythm of the night, but her thoughts refused to settle. Charlie's presence loomed large in her mind, a constant hum of awareness that wouldn't fade, no matter how much she willed it to. She kept seeing him in the rain, standing in the same darkness that she had called her home for so long, his face unreadable as he stared out into the night. It was different now. Before, Charlie had been part of the world she observed from a distance, a figure who existed in the daylight, separate from the quiet life she led. But lately, it was as if he had crossed into her world, into the night, and the boundary between them was beginning to blur. The realization that they had shared that moment in the rain, even though they hadn't spoken or acknowledged each other, lingered in her thoughts. It felt like a thread connecting them, something small but undeniable, pulling them closer together even as they remained apart. Katie turned onto her side, pulling the blankets up to her chin as if they could somehow protect her from the weight of the thoughts swirling in her mind. She hadn't told anyone about Charlie. Not her parents, not her doctors. Her life had always been compartmentalized, each piece carefully tucked away from the others, each secret carefully guarded. There was the world inside her home, the sterile, controlled existence that kept her safe, and there was the world outside, the one she could never fully belong to. And now, there was Charlie, someone who didn't quite fit into either world, but existed somewhere in between. The weight of keeping that secret, of hiding it from everyone, pressed down on her. It wasn't just the fact that she hadn't told anyone about Charlie. It was more than that. It was the way she had let herself be drawn to him, the way she had stood in the rain, watching him, knowing that he didn't know the truth about her. It was the way her heart quickened whenever she thought about him, a feeling that was as exhilarating as it was terrifying. The truth was, Katie knew that her connection to Charlie was fragile, built on a foundation of half-truths and unspoken secrets. He didn't know about her condition, didn't know that the reason she only appeared at night was because the sun was a threat to her very life. She had built her existence around that truth, her every decision shaped by the limitations of her illness, and yet, she had kept it from him. What would he think if he knew? That question haunted her. It was the reason she hadn't stepped out from the shadows that night when the rain fell between them like a curtain, why she had stayed hidden instead of crossing the invisible line that separated their worlds. Because as much as she longed to be part of his life, to be someone he could truly know, the fear of what he might think if he knew the truth kept her at a distance. Katie's fingers curled into the blankets, her chest tightening with the weight of it all. The secrecy, the lies, the fear. It was becoming too much. Her life had always been carefully controlled, every decision made to protect her from the dangers of her condition. But now, for the first time, she felt something slipping out of her grasp, something she couldn't control. And that something was Charlie. She sat up in bed, the room around her bathed in the soft glow of the moon filtering through the clouds. The house was silent, the only sound the faint hum of the air conditioning and the distant rustle of the wind outside. It was a familiar stillness, one that usually brought her comfort, but tonight it felt oppressive, like the quiet was closing in around her, amplifying the thoughts she couldn't escape. Katie slid out of bed, her bare feet hitting the cold wooden floor. She crossed the room to her window, her usual refuge, and looked out into the night. The world outside was still wet from the storm, the grass shimmering with droplets of water that reflected the faint light from the sky. She could see the outline of Charlie's house, dark and quiet, as if it, too, was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Her eyes lingered on his window, the one she had seen him standing at so many times before. It was dark now, the curtains drawn, but she could still picture him there, staring out into the night just as she was. The memory of that moment in the rain came rushing back, the way they had both stood in the darkness, separate but somehow connected by the shared experience of the storm. Katie leaned her forehead against the cool glass, her breath fogging up the window as she exhaled. She didn't know what to do anymore. The life she had built for herself, the routines that had kept her safe for so long, were starting to feel like a cage. The walls of her house, once a sanctuary, were now closing in, and the night, once her refuge, was beginning to feel more like a prison. But the scariest part wasn't the fear of getting hurt. It was the realization that she wanted something more, something beyond the walls and the safety of her carefully controlled existence. She wanted to be part of the world outside, to be with Charlie, to experience the things she had always been denied. And that desire, that longing, was both terrifying and exhilarating. The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight broke through the clouds and filtered into her room, Katie made a decision. She couldn't keep living like this, trapped between two worlds, unable to fully commit to either one. She couldn't keep hiding from Charlie, couldn't keep pretending that her feelings for him didn't exist. But more than that, she couldn't keep hiding from herself. Her illness was a part of her, a part she had spent her entire life trying to protect and manage. But it wasn't all of her. There was more to her than the disease that had shaped her life, more to her than the limitations that had defined her existence. And if she ever wanted to truly be with Charlie, she would have to let him see that. She would have to trust him with the truth. Katie sat at her window for a long time, watching the world outside as the sun rose higher in the sky. The yard was bathed in golden light, the rain from the night before sparkling like tiny diamonds in the grass. The storm had passed, leaving behind a sense of clarity, of calm after the chaos. She didn't know what the future held, didn't know how Charlie would react if she told him the truth. But she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't keep living in the shadows, hiding from the world and from herself. The weight of her secrets was too heavy, and it was time to let them go. Katie stood up, the decision settling in her chest like a quiet, steady flame. She would tell him. Maybe not today, maybe not even tomorrow, but soon. She would find a way to bridge the gap between them, to step out of the shadows and into the light. And when she did, she would finally know whether the connection between them was strong enough to survive the truth. Chapter 8. An Unspoken Distance. Katie spent the next few days in a quiet haze, the decision she had made hanging in the back of her mind like a weight she could not yet bear to lift. The air had grown cooler, the summer warmth fading as the early signs of autumn began to show in the color of the trees. Her world outside the window had taken on a different hue, the green of the leaves turning to shades of gold and red, a gentle reminder that time was passing, that change was inevitable. But inside, everything felt frozen, suspended between the moment she had decided to tell Charlie the truth and the moment she would actually do it. The house was as quiet as ever, her parents going about their usual routines while Katie watched from a distance. They didn't ask her questions, didn't pry into the corners of her mind where her secret thoughts about Charlie lived. And for that, She was grateful. This was something she had to navigate on her own, something she had to understand before she could share it with anyone else. Each night, she found herself drawn to the window, waiting for a glimpse of Charlie. Sometimes she saw him, a fleeting shadow passing through the yard, his figure disappearing into the trees. Other nights, he didn't appear at all, and the weight of his absence pressed heavily on her chest. The unspoken distance between them was growing, not just in the physical sense, but in the way she had been avoiding the inevitable confrontation with the truth. Katie played her guitar more often now, letting the soft melodies fill the quiet spaces of her home. The music was her solace, a way to express what she couldn't put into words. The notes were light, delicate, a reflection of the fragile balance she was trying to maintain. The guitar strings felt cool beneath her fingers, the vibration of the music resonating in her bones as she played, and for a while, it was enough to calm the storm inside her. But even the music couldn't quiet her thoughts forever. Charlie's presence lingered in every note, in every quiet moment when the house was still and the only sound was the distant rustle of the wind through the trees outside. She had grown used to his absence, the way he appeared and disappeared from her life without warning, and yet the uncertainty of it gnawed at her. One night, as she sat by the window with her guitar resting against her lap, Katie noticed a subtle shift in the air. The night felt heavier than usual, the breeze cooler, and the sky darker, as if the world was holding its breath in anticipation of something. She peered through the window, her eyes scanning the yard, the familiar landscape of trees and shadows that had become her nightly view. And then, she saw him. Charlie stood in his yard, his figure barely visible in the dim light of the street lamp at the corner. He was closer than usual, just beyond the fence that separated their houses, his posture tense as he stared up at the sky. Katie's heart leaped in her chest, her breath catching as she watched him, her fingers tightening around the neck of her guitar. For a moment, she considered turning away, hiding behind the curtain as she had done so many times before. But something in his posture, in the way he stood so still, made her stay. The night felt alive again, buzzing with the same quiet energy that had filled the air during the storm. Katie leaned closer to the window, her forehead pressing lightly against the glass, and she realized that Charlie was holding something in his hand. It was small, delicate, and as he turned it over in his fingers, the light from the street lamp caught the edge of it, making it glint faintly in the dark. Katie's pulse quickened as she watched him, 100 questions swirling in her mind. What was he thinking? What was he holding? She could feel the weight of the unspoken secrets between them, the tension that had built in the days since the rain, and it settled like a knot in her chest. Charlie stood there for what felt like an eternity, his eyes trained on the small object in his hand. Katie's mind raced, the need to know what he was thinking, what he was feeling, overwhelming her. She had always watched him from a distance, a silent observer in the shadows, but now that distance felt unbearable. And then, without warning, Charlie lifted his gaze toward her house. Katie froze, her breath catching in her throat. She wasn't sure if he could see her in the dark, hidden behind the curtains, but his eyes seemed to search for something, as if he knew she was there, watching. The connection between them, fragile as it was, crackled in the air, and Katie felt her heart beat harder in her chest. For the briefest moment, it felt as though everything was about to change. The distance between them seemed to shrink, the weight of her secrets pressing down on her shoulders, urging her to step out from behind the glass and bridge the gap. She could feel the decision looming, the need to tell him the truth pushing at the edges of her consciousness. But Katie stayed where she was, her feet rooted to the floor, her fingers still clutching the neck of her guitar. She wasn't ready, not yet. The fear of what might happen, of what Charlie might think if he knew the truth, held her back, tethering her to the safety of her home, of her solitude. Charlie didn't move for a long time. He simply stood there, his eyes on her house, his figure illuminated faintly by the soft glow of the street lamp. The world around them was quiet, the air heavy with unspoken words, and Katie felt as though the night itself was waiting for something to break the silence. And then, just as quietly as he had appeared, Charlie turned and walked back toward his house. His steps were slow, deliberate, as though he, too, was weighed down by the tension in the air. Katie watched him go, her chest tight with the pressure of all the things she wanted to say but couldn't. The door to his house closed behind him with a soft click, and once again, she was alone. The night stretched on, quiet and still, but the energy that had buzzed between them lingered, a reminder of the distance that remained unspoken. Katie sat by the window for a long time, her guitar silent in her lap, the weight of her decision pressing heavily on her. She knew that the time was coming, that she couldn't keep hiding from Charlie forever. The secrets she had kept for so long were starting to crack, the walls she had built around herself beginning to crumble. But for now, the silence remained, and Katie retreated into the safety of her room, the familiar darkness wrapping around her like a shield. She wasn't ready yet. The truth would come, but tonight, the distance between them remained. As the night deepened and the world outside grew quiet, Katie finally closed her eyes, the weight of her secrets still pressing down on her. The unspoken distance between her and Charlie was as heavy as ever, but beneath it, she could feel the flicker of something else, something fragile and new, waiting for the moment when everything would change. Tomorrow, maybe. Tomorrow, she would face the truth. But tonight, she would wait. Chapter 9. The Weight of Choices. The days rolled forward with a quiet inevitability, each one blending into the next, but Katie could feel the slow build-up of pressure inside her. The decision she had made was no longer just an idea. It had become a burden she carried with her everywhere, heavy and omnipresent. Every time she glanced at the clock, each tick of the second hand felt like a reminder that she was running out of time to tell Charlie the truth. The world outside had begun to change. Autumn had arrived in full force, the trees casting their brilliant colors across the landscape, the air crisp and sharp. The sun, once so high and unforgiving in the sky, now hung lower, its warmth fading into a gentler glow. Even during the daylight hours, the sharpness of the season's light seemed less dangerous to Katie, though she still stayed within the walls of her home, as if the invisible threat of exposure still lingered just out of reach. In the quiet of her room, she tried to focus on the simple things that had always brought her peace. Her music, the books she loved, the steady rhythms of her routine. But even those familiar comforts couldn't distract her from the knowledge that she had to make a choice soon. The gap between her and Charlie was widening, and the longer she waited, the harder it would be to close it. Katie found herself standing at the window more often, her fingers tracing the edge of the glass as she watched the world outside. Charlie had become a fixture in her thoughts, his presence an almost physical thing even when he wasn't there. She thought about him constantly, where he was, what he was doing, if he was thinking about her in the same way. But with each passing day, the weight of her secret became heavier, like a chain around her neck, pulling her further into herself. She hadn't seen him in a few days. The night after she had watched him standing in his yard, holding something in his hand, he had disappeared again. She didn't know where he went during the day, what his life was like beyond the small glimpses she had caught of him in the past. She only knew that when the sun dipped below the horizon, when her world came alive in the darkness, he had always been there, until now. The silence stretched out, her nights growing lonelier without him. Katie would sit by the window for hours, her guitar lying untouched on the floor, her eyes scanning the dark yard for any sign of movement. But the house next door remained quiet, its windows dark, as if it, too, had gone to sleep. She began to wonder if maybe Charlie had sensed something. Maybe he had felt the tension between them, the unspoken truth she had been hiding for so long. Maybe he had felt the distance growing, the invisible line she had drawn between them, keeping him just out of reach. The thought gnawed at her, eating away at her resolve. On the third night of Charlie's absence, Katie found herself unable to stay inside any longer. She needed air, needed space, needed to feel the world around her in a way that the confines of her room couldn't offer. It had been so long since she had stepped outside at night, so long since she had felt the coolness of the autumn breeze on her skin. Her parents were asleep, the house still and quiet, and for once, the safety of the indoors felt suffocating rather than protective. Without thinking, she slipped on her jacket and crept downstairs, her footsteps soft on the wooden floors. The house groaned quietly in the silence, as if protesting her decision, But Katie ignored the feeling of unease building in her chest. The door to the backyard creaked open, and the night air hit her like a wave, cool and fresh, carrying with it the scent of damp leaves and wood smoke. She stepped out into the yard, the grass wet beneath her bare feet. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a silvery glow over everything, and the stars seemed sharper, brighter against the dark expanse above. The world felt bigger out here, more expansive, and for a moment, Katie let herself breathe, filling her lungs with the cool air. The yard was quiet, the only sound the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. Katie glanced toward Charlie's house, her heart sinking when she saw that his windows were still dark. But the feeling of disappointment was fleeting, replaced by the strange sense of freedom that came with being outside, exposed to the elements in a way she hadn't been in so long. She wandered further into the yard, the familiar boundary of her world expanding with each step. The soft glow of the moonlight illuminated everything, casting long shadows that stretched across the grass. For the first time in what felt like forever, she wasn't watching from behind a window. She was part of the night, part of the world outside. The realization made her chest tighten with a mixture of exhilaration and fear. Katie found herself standing at the edge of the fence that separated her yard from Charlie's. The wooden slats were worn, the paint chipped and faded, but they felt like a barrier between two worlds, her carefully controlled life and the one she longed to be a part of. She reached out, her fingers brushing against the rough surface of the fence, and for a moment, she wondered what it would feel like to cross it, to step into his world, to leave behind the safety of her own. But the weight of her secret held her back. The truth she had kept from him was like a wall between them, invisible but impenetrable. She had been living with it for so long, had built her entire existence around it, and the thought of tearing it down felt both terrifying and impossible. How could she explain to him the life she led, the limitations that shaped every decision she made? How could she make him understand the fear that had been with her for as long as she could remember? The fear of the sun, of the daylight, of what could happen if she let herself believe in a life beyond the shadows. The night pressed in around her, quiet and still, and Katie felt a pang of longing so deep it took her breath away. She wanted to tell him, to explain everything, but the fear of what might happen if she did kept her rooted in place. What if he didn't understand? What if he looked at her differently, saw her as fragile, as broken? The thought made her stomach churn, and she pulled her hand away from the fence, retreating back into the safety of her yard. Katie stood there for a long time, staring at the space between their houses, the distance that felt both small and insurmountable. The night was full of possibilities, of choices waiting to be made, but she couldn't shake the feeling that no matter what she decided, the weight of her secret would always be with her. It was a part of her, as much a part of her as the music she played, the nights she spent watching the world from her window. And yet, there was something else, a quiet, persistent voice in the back of her mind, urging her to take a step forward, to move beyond the fence, beyond the boundaries she had set for herself. The choice was hers to make, but the fear of what lay on the other side held her back. As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, casting a pale glow over the world, Katie turned and walked back toward the house. The door creaked softly as she stepped inside, the warmth of the indoors wrapping around her like a familiar blanket. But as she climbed the stairs to her room, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, that the weight of her decision was no longer something she could ignore. She sat by the window once again, watching as the sun slowly rose, painting the sky with shades of pink and gold. The beauty of it, the way the light transformed the world, was something she had never fully appreciated before. It was a reminder that there was more to life than the safety of the shadows, more to the world than the darkness she had grown so accustomed to. Katie knew that the time to make her choice was approaching. The weight of her secret was growing heavier with each passing day, and soon, she would have to decide whether to keep living in the shadows or to step into the light, no matter the risk. Tomorrow, maybe, tomorrow, she would make her choice. But for now, the night still belonged to her, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like enough. Chapter 10. Crossing Boundaries. The following days drifted by, each one marked by the same cycle of sunrises and sunsets, yet each filled with a growing sense of urgency. Katie could feel the weight of her decision pressing against her, a constant reminder that she was standing at a crossroads in her life. The delicate balance she had maintained in her world of shadows was shifting, and every moment felt like a step closer to something she could no longer ignore. As autumn deepened, the world outside her window transformed. The trees lost their vibrant leaves, the ground blanketed in a carpet of red and gold. The air turned crisper, tinged with the scent of wood smoke and fallen leaves. Evenings settled in sooner, bringing with them a profound darkness that enveloped the world. Katie often sat in the dim light of her room, strumming her guitar softly, letting the music weave around her like a comforting shawl. But each note felt laced with the unresolved tension that hung in the air, a reminder that she was running out of time. One evening, the silence of the house was broken only by the sound of the wind rattling the branches outside. Katie glanced at the clock, the hands creeping toward twilight, and a sudden resolve washed over her. She had been avoiding it for too long, clinging to the shadows when the world outside beckoned. This was her chance, a chance to take the step she had been hesitating to make. With a determination she hadn't felt before, Katie slipped on her jacket, feeling the familiar fabric wrap around her like a shield. She stood for a moment in her room, glancing back at her guitar resting on the bed, the silent companion that had witnessed her fears and dreams. The thought of leaving it behind felt strange, yet necessary. Tonight was about more than music. It was about bridging the distance she had created between herself and Charlie. As she stepped out into the night, the cool air greeted her with an invigorating embrace. The world was transformed under the moonlight, the darkness now a canvas splattered with silver. She took a deep breath, the crispness of the air filling her lungs as she moved toward the fence that separated her yard from Charlie's. Standing there, she could feel the familiar weight of anxiety tugging at her, but it was different this time. It was laced with a sense of purpose, the knowledge that she could no longer hide from her truth. She leaned against the wooden slats, her fingers brushing over the rough surface, feeling the texture beneath her fingertips. The distance between them was nothing more than wood and space, yet it had become a chasm that seemed impossible to cross. In that moment, Katie made a choice. She stepped forward, pushing aside her fears, her heart pounding as she moved closer to the fence. The night was alive with possibilities, and the urge to break free from the confines of her own limitations urged her on. She could no longer wait for the perfect moment, the perfect words. The time for hesitation was over. With a gentle push, she climbed over the fence, the splintered wood digging into her palms, but she welcomed the sensation. It grounded her, reminded her that she was taking action, that she was no longer an observer in her own life. As she landed softly on the other side, she paused, the quiet of the night wrapping around her like a cloak. Katie's heart raced as she stood in Charlie's yard, her breath quickening with each passing second. The grass was cool beneath her feet, the ground familiar yet foreign. This was the threshold she had crossed, the boundary that had separated their worlds for too long. And now, she was here. No longer hidden away but standing in the very space that had once felt so out of reach. The night deepened, the shadows deepening around her, but she felt illuminated by her decision. There was something magical about the moment, a stillness that enveloped her as she took in the yard that had become a backdrop for her daydreams. She could see the outline of Charlie's house, the windows dark, but she could almost feel the warmth radiating from within. It was a home, a life, a reality that she had longed to be a part of, but had always kept herself away from. As she stood there, a mix of exhilaration and fear surged within her. Would he understand? Would he accept her, with all her complexities, her secrets? The thoughts raced through her mind like fireflies flickering in the dark, illuminating the path ahead. She began to walk, her footsteps soft against the cool grass, the quiet of the night wrapping around her like a protective barrier. Each step felt like a small triumph, a declaration that she was no longer willing to let fear dictate her life. She moved closer to the house, her heart pounding in her chest, the weight of anticipation growing heavier with each heartbeat. Katie reached the front porch, her fingers brushing against the railing as she hesitated. the reality of what she was about to do hitting her with a rush of emotion. She could turn back. She could retreat to the safety of her home, away from the vulnerability that lay ahead. But the thought of retreating felt wrong. This was her moment to claim, her chance to confront the distance she had created. She took a deep breath, her pulse quickening, and stepped onto the porch. The wooden boards creaked softly beneath her weight, the sound echoing in the stillness of the night. The air felt thick with unspoken words, the potential for change crackling like electricity. Katie looked toward the door, her heart pounding in her chest as she considered what lay beyond it. She could see the faint glow of light spilling through the cracks, the warmth of the home beckoning her closer. The world around her faded into the background, and all that mattered was this moment. The choice she had made, the path she had chosen to walk. Summoning her courage, Katie stepped forward, her hand raised as she knocked softly on the door. The sound reverberated in the stillness, and in that moment, she felt a wave of vulnerability wash over her. What would happen next? What would he say? She was ready to confront the unknown, ready to face whatever might lie ahead. But instead of waiting, she took a step back, her heart racing. What if he wasn't home? What if she had come all this way only to find emptiness? The thought made her stomach churn, and she glanced around, the shadows of the night creeping in closer. And then, in that moment of uncertainty, the door swung open. The light from inside spilled out, illuminating the porch and casting a warm glow over Katie. She stood frozen, her heart racing as she met the surprised gaze of Charlie. He stood there, his expression shifting from confusion to something deeper, something that sent a jolt of electricity through her veins. In that split second, the distance between them felt like both an ocean and a whisper. She could see the questions in his eyes, the way they searched her face as if trying to understand what had brought her here, to this moment, to this threshold. Katie felt the weight of everything she had kept hidden, her fears, her struggles, her truth, pressing down on her. But beneath it all was a flicker of hope, a flicker of what could be. She took a breath, the words unspoken, hanging in the air between them like a fragile thread. The darkness of the night felt alive with possibility, and for the first time, she felt like she was where she was meant to be. In that moment, with the warmth of Charlie's gaze on her, Katie understood that this was only the beginning. She had crossed a boundary, taken a step into the unknown, and whatever happened next, she was ready to face it. The truth would come, and when it did, she would be ready. Chapter 11. Revelations in the Night. The stillness enveloped them, a heavy blanket that seemed to hush the world around. Katie stood on the threshold, her heart thundering in her chest as she met Charlie's surprised gaze. The warmth from the glow of the inside wrapped around her, beckoning her into the familiar space she had only watched from afar. For a moment, everything felt suspended in time, the air thick with unspoken words and possibilities. Charlie's expression shifted from surprise to curiosity, and Katie could see the questions forming in his mind, the silent inquiries that danced behind his eyes. She felt vulnerable, standing there exposed beneath the weight of his gaze, as if every secret she had kept hidden was laid bare before him. The fear of the unknown crept in, but it was intermingled with a strange thrill. She was here, and that meant she was ready to confront whatever lay ahead. After what felt like an eternity, Charlie stepped aside, a silent invitation to enter. As Katie crossed the threshold, she felt a rush of warmth envelop her, the space filled with the comforting scent of wood and something sweet, a hint of cinnamon lingering in the air. The house was alive with a gentle hum, a reflection of the life that thrived within its walls. Inside, the room opened up before her, filled with soft light and the familiar shadows that danced across the walls. The cozy atmosphere wrapped around her, making her feel both welcomed and anxious. She could feel her heart racing, her hands trembling slightly at her sides as she took in the details of the space. The bookshelves lined with stories waiting to be told, the plush couch inviting her to sink in and stay a while. Charlie closed the door behind her, the soft click echoing in the silence. Katie shifted her gaze back to him, her heart fluttering at the proximity. He stood there, a few steps away, his expression a mix of surprise and concern. She could sense the uncertainty hanging in the air, the tension building as he waited for her to say something, anything, to fill the silence. But Katie hesitated. The weight of her truth felt heavier than ever, and the thought of voicing it sent a wave of anxiety crashing over her. Instead of speaking, she allowed herself to breathe deeply, letting the warm air fill her lungs. She needed to gather her thoughts, to find a way to express the complexity of her reality. As she stood there, she took in the sight of Charlie. The way the light played off his features, casting gentle shadows that accentuated the warmth in his eyes. He looked different in this space, more alive, more real, and she felt the distance she had once maintained begin to close. She could see the curiosity in his gaze, the way he leaned slightly forward, as if drawn to her, wanting to understand. Katie's heart raced at the thought of sharing her truth, but the fear of rejection lingered, an unwelcome guest at the table. She felt the shadows of her secret creep in, threatening to drown out the warmth that surrounded her. What if he didn't understand? What if the reality of her life pushed him away? The silence stretched between them, and she could sense Charlie's anticipation, the way he was waiting for her to fill the void. But instead of words, she found herself taking a step closer to him, a tentative movement that spoke volumes. It was an unspoken invitation, a connection that bridged the gap between their worlds, and as she moved, she could see the flicker of hope in his expression. Katie's gaze dropped to the floor, and she allowed herself a moment to gather her thoughts, to consider how to explain everything that had shaped her life. She thought of the countless hours spent behind the safety of her window, the solitude that had been both her refuge and her prison, the struggles, the pain, and the longing to be seen, to be understood, pressed down on her. But there was also a flicker of determination that ignited within her. With a deep breath, she took another step closer, her heart pounding as she reached for the hem of her jacket, pulling it tighter around her. It was a gesture of both comfort and uncertainty, a way to shield herself from the vulnerability that loomed ahead. But as she glanced back up at Charlie, she saw something shift in his gaze, a growing understanding, a willingness to listen. In that moment, Katie knew she had to take the leap. She had come this far, crossing the threshold into his world, and now she needed to share the truth that had kept her isolated for so long. She could no longer let fear dictate her life. She had to be brave for both of them. Katie glanced around the room, searching for a focal point to ground herself. Her eyes landed on a window overlooking the backyard, the moonlight spilling in and casting a soft glow across the room. It reminded her of the countless nights she had spent watching the world from her own window, yearning to be part of it. She took a step toward the window, the action grounding her as she prepared to face the truth. Standing by the window, she turned to Charlie, her heart racing as she began to move her hands, her fingers trembling slightly. She could feel the warmth of his gaze on her, the weight of his attention lending her strength. She focused on the moonlight filtering through the glass, illuminating the space between them, and as she took a breath, she felt the knot in her stomach loosen just a fraction. Katie raised her hands, her fingers moving in a fluid motion, weaving through the air as she began to express herself through gestures, painting a picture of her life without words. The movements were both freeing and grounding, a way to convey the emotions she had been carrying inside. She thought of her world, the beauty and the pain, the challenges she faced each day living with xeroderma pigmentosum, the need to remain hidden away from the sun's harmful rays. As she moved, she felt the tension in the air shift, the silence now filled with understanding. Charlie watched intently, his expression softening as he tried to interpret the language of her hands. She could see the curiosity in his eyes, the way he leaned closer, eager to grasp the essence of what she was sharing. Katie gestured to the window, tracing the outline of her old life, the one spent behind closed doors. She illustrated the loneliness, the longing for connection that had kept her awake at night. The music she played was a lifeline, a way to express what words could not, and she conveyed that through her movements, the rhythm of her heart echoing in each motion. As she shared her story, she could feel the fear beginning to fade. With each gesture, the burden she had carried for so long felt lighter, as if she were releasing the weight of her secret into the air. She showed him the moments of joy that had punctuated her solitude, the thrill of late-night walks, the laughter she shared with her family, the dreams she had of one day stepping into the light. But then, as she reached the pinnacle of her expression, she illustrated the shadows that loomed large in her life. The fear of the sun, the reality of her illness, the isolation that had become a constant companion. Her hands trembled as she depicted the barriers that had kept her confined, the struggles that had defined her existence. Katie could see the emotions flickering across Charlie's face, the understanding dawning in his eyes as he grasped the magnitude of what she was trying to convey. She felt a rush of vulnerability, a wave of relief washing over her as she realized that she was finally being seen for who she truly was. In that moment, the air shifted again, filled with a new energy. The silence between them was no longer a chasm of uncertainty. It had become a bridge of connection. Katie felt the fear dissipate, replaced by a sense of belonging, a sense of understanding that had eluded her for so long. She stepped back from the window, her heart still racing but now fueled by hope. Charlie stood before her, the surprise replaced by a deeper awareness of the journey she had just shared. His expression spoke volumes, a mix of admiration and compassion, and she felt the warmth of his presence enveloping her, grounding her in a way that made her feel safe. Katie took a breath, her heart swelling with a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. She had crossed a threshold, and now they stood together in a new space. A space filled with understanding, vulnerability, and the potential for something beautiful to blossom. As the moonlight bathed the room in its soft glow, Katie felt the weight of the world lift from her shoulders. The fear that had once bound her began to unravel, and in its place grew a sense of freedom, the freedom to embrace her truth and the connection that had formed between them. They were standing on the brink of something new, and in that moment, Katie knew that whatever lay ahead, she was ready to face it. She had taken the leap, and now, together, they could navigate the uncharted waters of their journey. In the quiet of the night, Katie felt a surge of hope. She was no longer alone. She was seen, understood, and accepted. And as the stars twinkled above, casting their light over the world, she knew that this was only the beginning. Chapter 12. Navigating New Waters. The room settled into a comfortable silence, each breath shared between Katie and Charlie echoing the unspoken understanding that had blossomed in the wake of her revelation. The moonlight danced across the walls, painting intricate patterns that seemed to celebrate their newfound connection. As they stood there, an uncharted territory stretched before them, full of possibilities and uncertainties. Katie felt a mix of exhilaration and vulnerability swirling within her. She had laid her truth bare, and though the act of sharing had been daunting, it had also been liberating. The weight of her secret no longer pressed down upon her like a suffocating blanket. Instead, it felt like a door had opened, inviting her to step into the light and embrace the world beyond the shadows. Charlie remained still, his gaze fixed on her with an intensity that sent butterflies fluttering in her stomach. She could see the gears turning in his mind, processing the gravity of what she had shared. His expression was one of compassion, the warmth radiating from him anchoring her in this moment of vulnerability. After what felt like an eternity, Katie stepped back from the window, her heart still racing with the intensity of their connection. The soft glow of the room wrapped around them like a protective barrier, shielding them from the outside world. She turned her gaze toward the familiar contours of Charlie's space, letting herself take in the details she had once only glimpsed from her own window. The walls were adorned with photographs, moments frozen in time, capturing laughter, adventure, and the simple beauty of life. Each image told a story, a glimpse into the world that Charlie inhabited, and she felt a pang of longing. She yearned to be a part of those stories, to share in the experiences that had shaped him. Yet, even as she admired the warmth of his life, a flicker of insecurity crept in. Would she fit into this picture? Katie glanced back at Charlie, her heart swelling with both hope and uncertainty. The fear that had held her captive for so long still lingered in the corners of her mind, but it was now entwined with a thread of courage. They had crossed a boundary, and now, she needed to show him not just her truth, but her desire to be part of his world. With newfound determination, Katie took a step closer to him, the space between them feeling electric. She gestured to the photographs on the wall, her fingers tracing the outline of one that captured a moment of pure joy. A sunlit day, Charlie surrounded by friends, laughter frozen in time. Her heart raced as she indicated the scene, longing to understand more about the life he lived beyond the shadows of her own. Charlie's eyes followed her gesture, and in that moment, she could see the recognition in his gaze. He understood her desire to connect, to bridge the gap that had existed between them for so long. He stepped closer, the warmth of his presence enveloping her like a protective cocoon. They were sharing not just a space, but an experience, two lives intertwining, each with its own complexities. As they stood side by side, Katie could feel the pulse of excitement coursing through her veins. She was no longer an observer. She was part of this world, part of his life. She felt the urge to know everything about him. The stories behind the photographs, the laughter that had echoed in those moments, and the dreams that shaped his reality. Charlie pointed to another photograph, a winter scene where snowflakes danced in the air, and a group of friends were bundled in cozy jackets, their faces alight with joy. Katie watched him as he shared a silent story through gestures, his hands moving expressively, as if trying to paint a vivid picture of the memory. In that moment, she felt the walls that had separated them beginning to dissolve. Charlie's enthusiasm was infectious, and she couldn't help but smile at the way his eyes sparkled as he relayed the joy of that day. She found herself leaning in, captivated not just by the memories, but by the way he brought them to life. As the evening wore on, they moved from photograph to photograph, each image unlocking a new piece of Charlie's world. He pointed out familiar faces, shared snippets of adventures, and revealed the stories behind the smiles. Katie listened intently, her heart swelling with each revelation, each glimpse into the life he had built. With every gesture, she could feel their connection deepening. She shared in his joy, allowing herself to imagine a future where she could step into these memories, where the warmth of companionship enveloped her like a familiar blanket. For the first time, she could envision a life outside her window, a life that included laughter, adventure, and love. The night unfolded like a delicate blossom, each petal revealing a new layer of their relationship. Katie felt the thrill of anticipation dancing in the air, the promise of what lay ahead igniting a fire within her. She yearned for more stories, more laughter, and more moments to share together. As the hours slipped by, the world outside faded into a distant murmur, and the two of them remained cocooned in the warmth of the room. They shared glances filled with unspoken understanding, each gaze a testament to the connection they were forging. Katie's heart swelled with hope as she let herself imagine what it would be like to be part of Charlie's life. A life filled with sunlight and laughter, with friends and adventures that extended beyond the confines of her home. She longed to step outside, to embrace the world in all its vibrant hues, to live freely and fully alongside him. The night deepened, casting a serene stillness over the house. The warmth of the moment enveloped them, and Katie felt a sense of belonging she had never known before. The shadows that had once loomed large in her life now felt like mere whispers, receding as the light of their connection grew stronger. As the clock ticked softly in the background, Katie found herself lost in thought, her mind swirling with dreams and possibilities. She felt a renewed sense of determination rising within her. She could no longer remain an observer. She wanted to actively participate in the world, to embrace the adventures that awaited them. With that resolve burning brightly in her heart, Katie turned to Charlie, her expression filled with hope and purpose. She gestured toward the window, indicating the night sky beyond, the vastness of the world waiting to be explored, the stars twinkling like beacons of possibility. In that moment, she knew that she wanted to take the next step, to break free from the confines of her previous existence. She longed for adventures, for late-night strolls under the stars, for moments that would shape their shared story. Charlie's eyes sparkled with understanding, and she could feel the warmth of his presence radiating towards her. It was as if he could sense her yearning, her desire to step into the light and embrace the life they could create together. The unspoken bond between them grew stronger, weaving a tapestry of connection that bound their hearts. With the moon shining brightly outside, Katie took a deep breath, feeling the exhilaration of possibility wash over her. She was ready to embrace the journey ahead, ready to explore the depths of their connection, ready to carve out a place for herself in Charlie's world. As the night unfolded, they stood together at the cusp of something beautiful, a new beginning woven from the threads of their past and present. The possibilities stretched out before them like an open road, and Katie felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the path that had led her to this moment. With a heart full of hope, she turned to Charlie, her spirit buoyed by the connection they had forged. Together, they would navigate the uncharted waters of their relationship, ready to embrace the adventures that awaited them. In the warmth of that night, surrounded by the whispers of the past and the promise of the future, Katie felt alive. She was ready to step into the light, ready to embrace the love that awaited her. Together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead, hand in hand, hearts intertwined and spirits unbound. Chapter 13. A Journey Beyond the Window. The days that followed Katie's revelation seemed to shimmer with an intensity that took her breath away. Each night, as the world outside her window sank into darkness, she felt the thrill of possibility coursing through her veins. The bond between her and Charlie had grown stronger, illuminating the corners of her life that had long been shrouded in shadows. Charlie began to share more of his life with Katie, taking her on a journey through the moments that had shaped him into the person he was. Every evening, as twilight descended and painted the sky in hues of deep indigo and shimmering silver, they would settle into the comfort of his living room, surrounded by the echoes of laughter and memories captured in photographs. Katie relished the stories he told, the adventures that danced on the edges of his memories. They spoke of hiking trips through lush green forests, spontaneous road trips with friends, and summer nights filled with barbecues and starlit conversations. Each tale opened a window into a world that felt tantalizingly close yet impossibly distant. As the nights unfolded, the walls of her own life began to crack, allowing beams of light to seep through. She found herself yearning for the experiences Charlie described, days spent under the sun, laughter shared with friends, and the thrill of living fully, unrestrained by the limitations she had always known. Determined to join him in that world, Katie decided it was time to make a change. She wanted to step outside, to feel the cool breeze against her skin, to be a part of life's vibrant tapestry. One evening, as they sat on the couch, she gazed out the window, watching the stars twinkle against the velvet sky. The idea took root in her heart, growing stronger with each passing moment. With that thought in mind, Katie stood, her heart racing with anticipation. She motioned toward the window, her fingers tracing the outline of the glass. The world beyond beckoned her, and she felt an insatiable desire to experience it firsthand. Charlie followed her gaze, his expression shifting from curiosity to understanding, a smile slowly spreading across his face as he sensed her longing. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a soft glow over the neighborhood, and Katie felt the call of adventure echoing in her heart. Charlie stepped closer, and together they moved toward the window. As she pushed it open, a gentle breeze swept through the room, carrying with it the scent of blooming flowers and the soft rustle of leaves. Katie's heart raced at the thought of venturing into the night. She had spent so long observing from her window, confined by her fears and limitations. But now, with Charlie by her side, the prospect of stepping outside felt like a promise of freedom, of connection, and of embracing life in all its forms. With a deep breath, Katie climbed through the window, the cool night air wrapping around her like a comforting embrace. Charlie followed closely, and together they stepped onto the grass, the soft earth beneath their feet grounding her in a way she had longed for. The night was alive with sounds, the distant hum of crickets, the rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze, and the soft whispers of the world around them. Katie closed her eyes for a moment, savoring the sensations. She felt a rush of exhilaration wash over her, mingling with the quiet trepidation that lingered in the back of her mind. As they wandered into the night, Katie marveled at the beauty surrounding her. The stars glittered like diamonds scattered across the sky, and the moon illuminated their path, casting a silvery glow on the world. She had always admired this beauty from afar, but now it felt different, more alive, more vibrant, as if the universe was welcoming her into its embrace. They walked side by side, their footsteps barely making a sound on the grass, the air thick with a sense of adventure. Charlie pointed out constellations, his fingers tracing the shapes of ancient stories woven into the night sky. Katie listened, captivated by his enthusiasm, her heart swelling with warmth at the joy of sharing this experience with him. With each step, she felt the weight of her fears beginning to lift. The confines of her illness faded into the background, replaced by a sense of belonging. She was no longer an outsider. She was a participant in life's grand adventure, and Charlie was her guide. As they ventured further, the neighborhood transformed around them. The familiar streets were now alive with the magic of the night. They wandered down quiet lanes, the moonlight casting shadows that danced at their feet. The world was peaceful, a sanctuary of tranquility that wrapped around them like a soft blanket. Katie marveled at the simple beauty of it all. The soft glow of porch lights, the silhouettes of trees swaying gently in the breeze, and the laughter of distant voices echoing through the night. It felt like a dream, a world she had longed to be a part of, and now she was here, fully immersed in it. Charlie led her to a nearby park, a place he had often visited with friends. As they stepped onto the grass, Katie's heart soared. The park was alive with the sounds of the night. Laughter from a group of friends gathered around a fire pit, the distant melody of music wafting through the air, and the rustle of leaves overhead. They settled on a blanket spread beneath a sprawling oak tree, its branches reaching out like welcoming arms. Katie felt the cool grass beneath her and leaned back, gazing up at the canopy of stars above. It was a view she had only seen from her window, but now it felt like a portal to infinite possibilities. As they lay there, the world around them faded, leaving only the two of them and the night sky. The constellations whispered stories of adventure and dreams, and Katie felt a deep sense of connection, not just to Charlie, but to the world itself. In that moment, she realized that her illness no longer defined her. She was not just Katie, the girl who spent her days in shadows. She was a vibrant spirit yearning to explore, to connect, to love. The fears that had once held her captive were beginning to dissolve, replaced by a fierce determination to live fully in each moment. As they lay together beneath the stars, Katie felt the warmth of Charlie's presence beside her. His gaze remained fixed on the sky, and she could sense his appreciation for the beauty that surrounded them. It was a shared experience that deepened their connection, solidifying the bond they had forged in the nights leading up to this moment. Time felt suspended as they embraced the stillness of the night. Katie's mind swirled with thoughts of the future, of all the adventures that awaited them. She envisioned laughter shared over bonfires, spontaneous midnight walks, and late-night conversations that stretched into the early hours of dawn. The possibility of creating memories together filled her with an overwhelming sense of joy. She longed to be a part of Charlie's world, to experience the warmth of friendship and the thrill of adventure. With each passing moment, the desire to embrace life fully blossomed within her, filling her heart with hope. As the night wore on, they found themselves sharing stories, their laughter mingling with the sounds of the night. Katie could see the spark in Charlie's eyes as he recounted tales of mischief and camaraderie with his friends. Each story painted a picture of a life filled with joy, and she felt a deep yearning to be a part of that vibrant tapestry. With each word, Katie felt herself becoming more intertwined with his life, the desire to break down the walls that had separated them growing stronger. She wanted to embrace the fullness of their connection, to dive into the adventures that awaited them. As the moon hung high in the sky, casting its soft glow over them, Katie turned her gaze to Charlie. The shadows danced on his face, highlighting the kindness in his eyes and the warmth of his smile. She felt a rush of gratitude for this moment, the freedom to be herself, to share in this experience, and to explore the depths of their connection. With a heart full of hope, Katie reached out, brushing her fingers against Charlie's hand. It was a simple gesture, yet it carried the weight of everything she felt. They were both navigating uncharted waters, and in that moment, she knew they were not alone. As the stars twinkled above, Katie realized that this was just the beginning of their journey. The night was filled with infinite possibilities, and she was ready to embrace every single one. Together, They would explore the world, hand in hand, hearts intertwined and spirits unbound. With the horizon stretching before them, Katie felt alive, truly alive, for the first time. The shadows of her past no longer defined her. They were merely stepping stones leading her to this moment of connection, of joy, and of hope. In the embrace of the night, surrounded by the beauty of the world, she understood that love, resilience, and the quest for a normal life were all intertwined in a beautiful tapestry that was uniquely theirs. And as she lay there with Charlie, she felt a sense of peace wash over her, a promise of what was to come, a journey that would unfold under the stars, illuminated by the light of their shared dreams. Chapter 14. A Step Toward Light. The sun broke over the horizon, casting its first golden rays through Katie's window, illuminating the room with a warmth that felt foreign yet comforting. The night had been transformative, filled with moments that blurred the lines between reality and dreams. As she stirred from sleep, memories of her time with Charlie washed over her, each one a soft echo of laughter and unspoken connection. Katie sat up slowly, her heart racing with excitement at the thought of a new day. She glanced at her guitar resting against the wall, its familiar presence inviting her to pour her feelings into music. It was a ritual that had always brought her solace, a way to express the emotions that often felt too big to contain. After a moment of contemplation, she reached for her guitar and settled into her favorite corner of the room. The soft morning light spilled in, illuminating her space as she began to strum the strings, the notes flowing like a gentle stream. Each chord resonated with the warmth of the previous night, the melody weaving itself into a tapestry of hope and possibility. As she played, she let her thoughts drift to Charlie. Memories of their shared laughter and the intimacy of their conversations flooded her mind. She could still feel the weight of his hand against hers. The way their fingers intertwined felt like a promise of adventure, of love, and of a life lived fully, unencumbered by fear. The song took shape, inspired by the journey they were embarking on together. It spoke of the night they had spent beneath the stars, of the thrill of stepping outside the confines of her illness, and of the courage it took to embrace the unknown. As the music filled the room, Katie felt a sense of empowerment wash over her, a recognition that she was no longer defined by her condition. After finishing the song, she put down her guitar and gazed out the window, watching as the world came to life. Birds flitted through the air, their cheerful songs a backdrop to the awakening day. The sun climbed higher, illuminating the street outside, and Katie felt a yearning to experience the vibrant energy that surrounded her. Determined to make the most of the day, she decided to invite Charlie over, her heart swelling with excitement at the thought of sharing her newfound enthusiasm with him. The idea of having him by her side felt exhilarating. Together, they could explore the world she had long observed from the confines of her room. After making her decision, she set about tidying her space, eager to create an inviting atmosphere for their time together. She arranged the cushions on her couch, straightened her guitar, and even placed a few potted plants by the window, their green leaves basking in the sunlight. With each small act, she felt a sense of purpose growing within her. Once everything was in place, Katie found herself lost in a whirlwind of anticipation. She glanced at the clock, counting down the minutes until Charlie would arrive. The seconds seemed to stretch into eternity, her excitement bubbling over as she imagined the possibilities of the day ahead. Finally, the doorbell rang, and her heart leaped in her chest. She opened the door to find Charlie standing there, a wide grin lighting up his face. He stepped into the room, and the moment their eyes met, Katie felt a wave of warmth wash over her. They exchanged glances filled with unspoken understanding, and in that instant, Katie knew that they were on the brink of something beautiful. The bond they had forged was palpable, and the air around them crackled with anticipation. As they settled onto the couch, Charlie's gaze drifted around the room, taking in the changes she had made since their last visit. He smiled approvingly at the fresh arrangements, his enthusiasm infectious. Katie felt a thrill of excitement course through her, knowing they were about to embark on a journey that would take them beyond her window and into the heart of life itself. With an air of adventure swirling between them, they decided to head outside, ready to explore the neighborhood together. The door swung open, and they stepped out into the sunlight, the warmth enveloping them like a gentle embrace. Katie felt a rush of exhilaration as they walked side by side, the world opening up before them. The streets were alive with activity, children laughing as they rode their bikes, neighbors chatting over picket fences, and the distant sound of music playing from a nearby house. It felt as if the world was inviting her to join in, to participate in the joy that surrounded her. As they strolled through the neighborhood, Katie took in the sights and sounds with wide-eyed wonder. The colors of flowers blooming in gardens, the laughter of children playing in the park, and the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze filled her senses. She felt alive, each moment infused with a sense of possibility. Charlie pointed out various landmarks along the way, sharing stories of his adventures in the area, his enthusiasm igniting a fire of excitement within her. They paused at a small cafe, its outdoor seating adorned with vibrant flowers and the tantalizing aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafting through the air. Katie looked at Charlie, her heart swelling with joy as he suggested they grab a snack. They settled at a small table outside, the warmth of the sun on their faces and the sounds of the world around them creating a comforting backdrop. As they enjoyed their treats, Katie felt a sense of belonging wash over her. This was what she had longed for. Moments filled with laughter, connection, and the simple joy of sharing life with someone who understood her. After their snack, they continued their exploration, wandering down tree-lined streets and through the park, where children played and families gathered for picnics. Katie felt a sense of freedom she had never known before. Each step was a declaration of her desire to embrace life fully. They wandered through the park, eventually coming across a small pond where ducks glided gracefully across the water. The sunlight danced on the surface, creating shimmering patterns that captivated Katie's attention. She felt a sense of tranquility wash over her as they stood there, watching the world unfold around them. In that moment, she realized that her fears no longer held power over her. The vibrant life surrounding her felt like a tapestry woven from moments of joy, love, and connection. Each thread added to the beauty of her existence, intertwining with Charlie's presence in a way that made her heart soar. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow across the landscape, Katie and Charlie found a quiet spot to sit. The horizon was ablaze with colors, hues of orange and pink blending seamlessly into the deepening blue of the evening sky. Katie felt a sense of gratitude welling up within her, a deep appreciation for the journey they had embarked upon together. In that serene moment, Katie reflected on the changes within herself. She had spent so long trapped in the confines of her illness, hidden away from the world. But now, with Charlie by her side, she felt empowered to embrace life in all its forms. The darkness that had once loomed over her had been replaced by the light of possibility. With the sun dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows across the ground, Katie leaned back against the grass, her heart full of hope. She could feel the connection between her and Charlie deepening, their hearts intertwining in a way that felt unbreakable. The night began to unfold, and as the stars emerged, Katie felt a surge of excitement for what lay ahead. Together, they would navigate this journey hand in hand, hearts open to the experiences that awaited them. As they sat together, basking in the glow of the twilight, Katie knew that this was just the beginning. The world was vast, filled with adventures waiting to be explored, and she was ready to embrace it all. With Charlie by her side, she felt invincible, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. With the stars twinkling above, Katie took a deep breath, grounding herself in the moment. She had taken a step toward light, and in that step, she had discovered the beauty of connection, love, and the joy of living fully. The journey ahead was filled with promise, and she was ready to embrace every moment of it. Together, they would weave a story of resilience, laughter, and love. A story that would transcend the boundaries of her illness and lead her to a life lived in vibrant color. Chapter 15. Beneath the Stars. The days began to merge into a beautiful rhythm, each one filled with laughter, exploration, and the unspoken understanding that had blossomed between Katie and Charlie. Their connection deepened with each adventure, weaving a tapestry of memories that stretched across the summer nights. The world outside Katie's window was no longer a distant realm. It had become a part of her story, a vibrant backdrop against which she was determined to paint her life. As the warm days of summer rolled on, Katie and Charlie found solace in the quiet moments they shared beneath the stars. They would often escape to the park after sunset, where the sounds of the city faded into a gentle murmur, replaced by the rustling leaves and the distant calls of night creatures. It was their sanctuary, a place where time seemed to stand still and their worries could dissipate into the cool night air. One particular evening, the sky was a deep velvet canvas dotted with countless stars, each twinkling like a tiny beacon of hope. Katie felt a thrill of excitement as they lay on a blanket spread out beneath the sprawling branches of an ancient oak tree. The scent of grass and earth filled the air, grounding her as she absorbed the beauty of the cosmos overhead. With each passing minute, she found herself getting lost in the constellations, their stories weaving through her mind like a gentle breeze. She was captivated by the vastness of the universe, the way it seemed to reflect the limitless potential of her own life. With Charlie beside her, she felt a sense of belonging that made her heart swell with joy. As they lay there, Katie's thoughts drifted to her dreams, of a life unburdened by illness, of adventures yet to be had, and of the love that blossomed between them. She turned her head slightly to glance at Charlie, who was lost in thought, his eyes shimmering with the reflections of the stars. In that moment, she felt a surge of gratitude for the connection they shared, a bond forged in vulnerability and understanding. A soft breeze rustled the leaves overhead, creating a symphony of whispers that wrapped around them. Katie felt her heart race at the thought of what lay ahead. The world felt alive with possibility, and she was determined to seize every moment, to immerse herself fully in the experiences that awaited them. As the night deepened, they began to share stories, tales of dreams, aspirations, and the experiences that had shaped them into who they were. Each word was a thread that bound them closer together, a testament to the trust they had built. Katie spoke of her passion for music, the way it had always been her escape, a refuge where she could express the emotions that often felt too big to contain. She shared her dreams of becoming a songwriter, of using her music to connect with others, to tell stories that resonated with the heart. Charlie listened intently, his eyes reflecting a mixture of admiration and encouragement. He understood the weight of her words, the vulnerability it took to share her deepest desires, and in that moment, Katie felt seen, truly seen for the first time. As the hours passed, they lost themselves in the magic of the night, their laughter mingling with the sounds of nature. Charlie pointed out different constellations, tracing their shapes in the sky with his finger. Katie watched, captivated by the way he spoke with such enthusiasm, the passion in his voice igniting a spark of inspiration within her. In the stillness of the night, Katie felt a sense of peace wash over her. The worries that had once consumed her began to fade, replaced by the joy of living in the moment. She reveled in the beauty of their connection, the understanding that flowed effortlessly between them. As the moon rose higher in the sky, casting a silvery glow over everything, Katie felt a warmth enveloping her. It was more than the physical warmth of the night. It was the warmth of companionship, of love blossoming in the spaces between their words. They had created a sanctuary together, a place where both could be their authentic selves without fear of judgment or misunderstanding. In that serene moment, Katie's heart swelled with hope. She knew that life would always present challenges, but with Charlie by her side, she felt ready to face anything. They had already taken significant strides, shattering the boundaries that had once held her captive. As they lay beneath the stars, Katie contemplated the future. She envisioned a life filled with music, laughter, and love. A life where she could share her passion with the world and inspire others through her art. The thought fueled her determination, igniting a fire within her to pursue her dreams with unwavering conviction. The nights spent with Charlie became a source of inspiration for her songwriting. With each new experience, she felt her creativity blossoming, the melodies flowing through her like a river, ready to be captured in song. The very act of sharing her dreams with Charlie felt like a release, a way to shed the weight of her illness and embrace her true self. As they lay there, the stars twinkling overhead, Katie felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She was grateful for the love that had blossomed between them, for the adventures they had shared, and for the journey that lay ahead. It was a journey filled with promise, and she was determined to embrace every moment, to savor the sweetness of life with Charlie by her side. In the days that followed, Katie found herself invigorated by their time together. The world felt different, brighter, as if the sun shone just a little more brightly each day. The moments they shared inspired her to create, to write, and to explore the depths of her passion for music. She began to compose new songs, each one a reflection of her experiences with Charlie. The laughter, the joy, the tender moments that made her heart flutter. Each note carried the essence of their connection, weaving a narrative that resonated deeply within her soul. Katie spent hours in her room, pouring her heart into her music, the lyrics flowing effortlessly as she channeled her emotions into song. The melodies danced through the air, creating an atmosphere of warmth and light. She felt empowered by the act of creation, a reminder that despite the challenges she faced, she could still carve out a space for herself in the world. As the nights continued to unfold, Katie and Charlie found new ways to deepen their bond. They ventured out into the community, attending local events, exploring parks, and soaking up the beauty of the world together. Each experience was a treasure, a moment etched in time that would forever hold a place in her heart. One evening, they attended a small outdoor concert in the park. The atmosphere was electric, filled with the vibrant energy of music and laughter. As they sat on a blanket, surrounded by the sounds of talented musicians, Katie felt a sense of belonging wash over her. This was what she had yearned for: the connection, the joy, and the shared love of music. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the crowd, Katie watched as musicians poured their hearts into their performances. Each song resonated with her soul, and she felt inspired to one day share her own music in a similar way. The thought ignited a spark of determination within her, propelling her toward her dreams with newfound fervor. Charlie looked over at her, his eyes filled with encouragement, and in that moment, Katie felt a rush of gratitude for his presence in her life. He had become her greatest supporter, her partner in every adventure, and the person who believed in her dreams even when she sometimes faltered. As the final notes of the concert faded into the night, Katie felt a wave of inspiration wash over her. The experience had reignited her passion for music, and she knew she had to channel that energy into her own songwriting. With each passing day, her determination grew stronger, propelling her toward her dreams. That night, as they walked home hand in hand, the world felt alive with possibility. The stars above twinkled brightly, mirroring the excitement that bubbled within her. She was ready to embrace the future, to chase her dreams fearlessly, and to share her heart through her music. In the quiet moments spent beneath the stars, Katie understood that life was a beautiful journey, one filled with unexpected twists and turns. She was determined to embrace it all: the joys, the challenges, and the love that had blossomed between her and Charlie. With each passing day, she felt a deeper connection to herself, to her dreams, and to the world around her. The shadows of her illness no longer held power over her. Instead, they served as reminders of her resilience and strength. As they reached her home, Katie turned to Charlie, her heart brimming with gratitude and love. She knew that this journey was just beginning, and with him by her side, she felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The stars continued to twinkle above, and as Katie closed her eyes, she made a silent promise to herself. She would chase her dreams with unwavering determination, create a life filled with love and music, and always cherish the moments spent beneath the stars with the one who had changed her life forever. Chapter 16. Whispers of the Heart. The summer days stretched lazily into a vibrant tapestry of golden sunlight and gentle breezes, each one more beautiful than the last. Katie's world had transformed into a sanctuary of laughter, music, and love. With Charlie at her side, she explored the depths of her dreams and the vastness of her emotions, embracing every moment as it came. As the season progressed, Katie found herself immersed in her songwriting. Each day brought fresh inspiration. Moments shared with Charlie, the beauty of the world around her, and the gentle pull of her heart urging her to express the depths of her feelings. The songs she composed became windows into her soul, reflecting the joys and struggles of her journey. One sunny afternoon, Katie decided to take her guitar outside. Seeking the solace of nature to fuel her creativity, she ventured to the park, where the vibrant colors of blooming flowers surrounded her. The air was fragrant with the scent of blossoms, and the soft hum of life filled the atmosphere. Finding a secluded spot beneath a large willow tree, she settled down, feeling the cool shade wrap around her like a comforting embrace. With her guitar resting on her lap, she began to strum the strings, allowing the melodies to flow freely as her thoughts danced through her mind. As the notes emerged, Katie's heart opened up, spilling forth the emotions that had been building within her. She wrote about the exhilaration of new love, the weight of her fears, and the resilience that had blossomed in her spirit. Each lyric felt like a revelation, a cathartic release that brought her closer to understanding herself and her place in the world. The sunlight filtered through the leaves above, casting dappled shadows on the ground, creating an ethereal atmosphere that felt almost magical. In that moment, she was completely absorbed in her art, the outside world fading away as she poured her heart into the song. As the hours slipped by, Katie lost herself in the music. The melodies intertwined with her thoughts, creating a narrative that was uniquely hers, a story of love, hope, and the courage to embrace life despite the challenges that lay ahead. Each note resonated with her, echoing the whispers of her heart. With each strum of the guitar, she envisioned the moments she had shared with Charlie, the laughter that filled the air, the quiet stargazing beneath the vast sky, and the warmth of his hand in hers. She felt a rush of emotions, the depth of her feelings for him spilling into the lyrics she crafted. The song became an homage to their bond, a celebration of the love that had ignited her spirit. As she finished the final verse, Katie set her guitar down and leaned back against the trunk of the willow tree, her heart racing with a mix of exhilaration and vulnerability. She had poured her soul into that song, and the weight of her emotions felt both freeing and daunting. It was a piece of her, a reflection of her journey, and she longed to share it with Charlie. With the sun beginning to dip low in the sky, casting a warm glow over the park, Katie gathered her things and headed home. The evening air felt electric with possibility, and as she walked, she couldn't help but feel a sense of urgency to share her creation with Charlie. She envisioned the look on his face as he heard her song for the first time, and it made her heart flutter. When she arrived home, she quickly prepared her space, eager to create an inviting atmosphere for their time together. She lit a few candles, their soft flicker casting gentle shadows on the walls, and set her guitar within reach. The anticipation bubbled within her, each moment stretching into an eternity as she awaited Charlie's arrival. As the sun set, the sky transformed into a breathtaking canvas of oranges, pinks, and purples, painting a backdrop that mirrored the emotions within her. She felt alive, charged with a creative energy that surged through her veins. The world outside seemed to echo her excitement, a harmonious symphony that accompanied her anticipation. Finally, the doorbell rang, and Katie's heart skipped a beat. She opened the door to find Charlie standing there, a bright smile lighting up his face. The warmth in his eyes sent a rush of happiness through her, and as he stepped inside, she felt an overwhelming sense of comfort in his presence. They settled onto the couch, the atmosphere filled with an electric buzz that thrummed in the air between them. Katie could barely contain her excitement, the song she had crafted begging to be shared. She reached for her guitar, the familiar weight of it bringing her a sense of calm as she prepared to unveil her creation. With a deep breath, she began to strum the opening chords, allowing the music to flow through her. Each note resonated in the air, wrapping around them like a warm embrace. As she sang, she poured her heart into every word, sharing the essence of her emotions and the journey that had led her to this moment. Katie watched as Charlie's eyes widened, his gaze filled with admiration and understanding. He leaned in closer, captivated by the story unfolding through her music. The vulnerability in her voice resonated with him, and she could see the connection deepening between them with each passing moment. As the final notes faded into the silence of the room, Katie felt a mixture of relief and exhilaration. She had shared a piece of herself, and the weight of vulnerability felt both terrifying and liberating. Charlie's expression was a mixture of awe and warmth, and in that moment, she knew that her song had touched him deeply. He reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining, and Katie felt an electric jolt at the contact. The unspoken connection between them spoke volumes, a testament to the bond they had forged through love and understanding. With the sun fully set, the world outside transformed into a sea of darkness dotted with stars. In that intimate space, Katie felt a profound sense of belonging. Charlie's presence wrapped around her like a blanket, grounding her as they shared in the quiet intimacy of the moment. As the night unfolded, they spoke without words, each glance, each touch, each shared smile communicating the depth of their feelings. Katie's heart swelled with gratitude, and she knew that she had found something truly special with Charlie. He had become her confidant, her partner in every adventure, and the one who believed in her dreams. In the days that followed, Katie continued to pour herself into her music, inspired by the love that had blossomed between them. Each song became a testament to their journey, a reflection of the strength she found in their connection. Charlie was her muse, and with each new creation, she felt herself growing more confident in her artistry. Together, they explored new places, ventured into the heart of the city, and experienced the beauty of life in full bloom. Each moment was a treasure, a reminder of the joy that came from embracing life with an open heart. Katie felt more alive than ever, the darkness that had once clouded her existence slowly dissipating with each shared experience. As the weeks turned into a blur of laughter and adventure, Katie found herself dreaming of a future filled with music, love, and the courage to chase her dreams. The fears that had once held her captive began to fade, replaced by the unwavering belief that she could create a life that was rich and vibrant. One evening, as they sat together beneath the stars once again, Katie turned to Charlie, her heart brimming with hope. She felt an overwhelming urge to express the gratitude she held within her, the appreciation for the way he had opened her eyes to the beauty of the world. With the soft glow of the moon illuminating their surroundings, Katie realized that this journey was not just about her. It was about them. Together, they had created a love that transcended the challenges they faced, a connection that filled the spaces in their hearts with light and understanding. As the night deepened, Katie closed her eyes, letting the cool breeze wash over her. She took a moment to breathe in the beauty of the world around her, feeling the rhythm of life pulsing through her veins. She knew that the journey ahead would not always be easy, but with Charlie by her side, she felt ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. With a heart full of dreams and a spirit ignited by love, Katie opened her eyes and gazed at the stars above. They were a reminder of the endless possibilities that awaited her, a promise that life was meant to be lived fully and fearlessly. In that moment, she whispered a silent vow to herself. She would chase her dreams, share her music with the world, and continue to embrace the beauty of life with Charlie by her side. Together, they would create a story filled with love, laughter, and the courage to face the unknown, weaving their hearts into a tapestry that would last a lifetime. As the stars twinkled overhead, Katie felt a sense of peace wash over her. The future was bright, filled with hope and promise, and she was ready to embrace every moment that lay ahead. Together, they would navigate the journey, hand in hand, hearts open to the beauty of life that awaited them beneath the vast, infinite sky. Chapter 17. A Distant Storm. As autumn settled over the landscape, the world transformed into a canvas of gold and crimson. Leaves danced gracefully to the ground, swirling in the crisp air, creating a patchwork of color that blanketed the earth. The days grew shorter, the sun's warmth retreating as shadows lengthened, but for Katie, the change brought a new kind of beauty, a gentle reminder of the ebb and flow of life. In this season of transition, Katie and Charlie's bond deepened. Their nights were spent beneath the stars, wrapped in blankets, sharing their dreams and aspirations. Each evening was a tapestry woven with laughter, warmth, and the soft strumming of Katie's guitar. As she composed new songs, she found herself exploring deeper emotions, crafting melodies that reflected the complexities of love and the uncertainties of the future. One evening, as twilight fell and the sky painted itself in hues of violet and indigo, Katie found herself sitting in her room, staring out the window. The air felt electric, charged with anticipation. The breeze carried whispers of an approaching storm, rustling the branches of the trees and causing the leaves to tremble in excitement. A sense of foreboding mingled with her anticipation, an instinctual recognition of the change that was about to unfold. Katie could sense that their idyllic world, cocooned in the warmth of their love, was on the brink of a shift. As she observed the clouds gathering in the distance, dark and brooding, a wave of unease washed over her. She felt a twinge of anxiety, the kind that had accompanied her throughout her life, a reminder of her fragile existence. Yet, intertwined with that fear was a profound hope that love could weather any storm. As the first drops of rain began to fall, she closed her eyes and listened to the rhythmic patter against the window. Each drop felt like a heartbeat, a reminder of the life pulsing around her. She could almost hear the echoes of her heart, each thump resonating with the melodies she had been crafting. The rain became a backdrop to her thoughts, a soothing balm that eased the tension coiling in her stomach. That night, as the storm raged outside, Katie and Charlie settled into their familiar routine. They curled up on the couch, wrapped in each other's arms, the flickering candlelight casting dancing shadows around the room. The sound of thunder rumbled in the distance, a deep growl that seemed to resonate with the turmoil in Katie's heart. She could feel the tension between them, an unspoken fear of the unknown that lingered in the air. As the storm intensified, Katie's thoughts drifted to the future. The joy they had experienced together felt fragile, like a delicate glass sculpture that could shatter at any moment. She wondered if Charlie truly understood the weight of her condition, the constant vigilance required to protect her from the sun's harmful rays. Would he remain by her side when the reality of her illness became too heavy to bear? The rain fell harder, each drop like a reminder of the barriers she had built around her heart. She longed to share her fears with Charlie, to lift the veil of uncertainty that hung over them, but she hesitated. The fear of losing him was paralyzing. What if revealing her vulnerabilities only pushed him away? In that moment, Katie made a silent promise to herself. She would confront her fears, not only for her own sake, but for the love they had nurtured. She would find a way to open up to Charlie, to share the depth of her struggles, and to invite him into the shadows that often consumed her. As the storm raged on, a flash of lightning illuminated the room, casting a stark light on their faces. Katie turned to Charlie, his expression calm and steadfast, grounding her in the midst of chaos. He reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining, and she felt a warmth spread through her, a reassurance that perhaps they could weather this storm together. As the rain continued to pour, they sat in comfortable silence, enveloped in each other's presence. Katie felt a flicker of hope ignite within her, an ember that reminded her that love was not merely a refuge, but also a source of strength. They were two souls navigating a turbulent world, each uniquely shaped by their experiences, yet united by an unbreakable bond. In the days that followed, the storm transformed into a lingering drizzle, a gentle reminder of the tempest they had faced. The air was fresh and crisp, carrying with it the scent of earth and renewal. The world outside seemed to mirror Katie's heart, a reflection of resilience and rebirth. Katie and Charlie spent more time together, venturing into the golden-hued afternoons to explore the remnants of autumn. They walked through the park, the ground carpeted with fallen leaves, each step crunching beneath their feet. The colors of the trees created a breathtaking backdrop, a kaleidoscope of nature's beauty that reminded Katie of the vibrancy of life. During these outings, Charlie's presence felt like a beacon of light. He had a way of making the mundane extraordinary, of turning every moment into an adventure. They discovered hidden paths, watched squirrels scurry through the trees, and shared stolen kisses beneath the canopies of vibrant foliage. Katie cherished each fleeting moment, knowing that they were creating memories that would sustain her through the darker days. However, as the days grew shorter and the sun dipped lower in the sky, Katie felt a familiar sense of dread creeping back into her heart. The changing seasons served as a reminder that time was not on her side. Each day without sunlight felt like a day lost, a step further from the life she craved. One afternoon, as they sat together in the park, Katie gazed up at the darkening clouds gathering above. A sense of urgency gripped her. She knew that soon the sun would retreat for winter, leaving her confined to her room, away from the world that pulsed with life outside her window. She could feel the weight of her thoughts pressing down on her, a reminder of the barriers that kept her isolated. That night, as they returned home, the rain began to fall once more, a soft patter that echoed her unease. Katie could feel the tension building, a storm brewing within her. She wanted to open up to Charlie, to share her fears and uncertainties, but the words felt trapped in her throat. Instead, she turned to her guitar, seeking solace in the strings. The notes flowed through her, each chord resonating with the emotions she struggled to articulate. As she played, she poured her heart into the music, hoping that somehow, through the melodies, Charlie could sense the turmoil within her. Charlie watched her with a quiet intensity, his presence a calming force amid her internal storm. She could feel his gaze on her, a silent invitation to share her heart. Yet, the fear of vulnerability held her captive, and she continued to play, allowing the music to carry her emotions. As the rain fell heavier, a sense of urgency pushed Katie to confront her fears. The time had come to embrace the vulnerability she had shied away from for too long. She could no longer allow her worries to overshadow the love they had built. It was time to let Charlie in. With a deep breath, she set down her guitar and turned to him. The room was dimly lit, the flickering candlelight casting gentle shadows on the walls. She looked into his eyes, searching for reassurance and strength. The storm outside mirrored the tempest within her, a chaotic blend of emotions swirling together. Katie's heart raced as she took a step closer, the distance between them shrinking. The moment felt monumental, as if she stood on the precipice of something profound. She needed him to understand her struggles, to see her for who she truly was, a girl with dreams and fears, navigating a world that often felt overwhelming. In that moment, the words spilled out, a floodgate releasing years of pent-up emotions. She shared her fears about her condition, the weight of living in the shadows, and the anxiety of facing a future where she might not be able to experience life to its fullest. As she spoke, Katie felt a sense of liberation wash over her, each word freeing her from the chains of isolation. Charlie listened intently, his gaze unwavering. The room was filled with an understanding silence, a safe space where vulnerability thrived. He didn't interrupt, didn't try to soothe her with platitudes. He simply absorbed her words, allowing her to share her heart. As Katie finished, she felt a mixture of relief and trepidation. Would this revelation change everything? Would it create a rift between them? But as she looked into Charlie's eyes, she saw something profound reflected back, a promise of love and acceptance. The storm outside began to subside, the rain easing into a gentle drizzle. In the stillness that followed, Katie felt a profound shift within herself. The weight she had carried for so long felt lighter, the burden of her fears shared and softened by the love they had nurtured. Charlie reached for her hand, their fingers entwining once more. The warmth of his touch grounded her, and she felt a surge of gratitude for the bond they shared. In that moment, she realized that love was not just about the joyful moments. It was also about facing the storms together, weathering the uncertainties, and embracing the beauty of vulnerability. As the rain continued to fall gently against the window, Katie knew that she had taken a step toward healing. She felt empowered by her honesty, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together, they could navigate the complexities of life, hand in hand, hearts open to the journey before them. The future remained uncertain, but with Charlie by her side, Katie felt a newfound sense of hope. As the storm subsided and the night settled into a tranquil hush, She knew that love would guide them through the darkest nights and illuminate the path toward a brighter tomorrow. Chapter 18. Into the Light. As winter descended upon the town, the world outside transformed into a glistening wonderland. Snow blanketed the landscape, covering the ground in a soft, white layer that sparkled under the pale sun. The trees, stripped of their leaves, stood tall and proud, their branches adorned with delicate icicles that caught the light like tiny prisms. The air was crisp and invigorating, carrying with it the scent of pine and the faint hint of smoke from distant chimneys. For Katie, the beauty of winter was both enchanting and melancholic. The nights had grown longer, and the sun retreated earlier, casting shadows over her life. But within the confines of her warm home, she felt a sense of comfort. Each day, she would gaze out her window, watching the world transform into a serene paradise. Yet, the beauty was laced with a longing for normalcy, a yearning to experience life beyond her walls. Katie and Charlie continued to navigate their relationship, their connection deepening despite the challenges posed by the cold and her condition. Their nights remained filled with laughter, warmth, and music, the flickering candlelight illuminating their faces. They would spend hours curled up together, sharing stories of dreams, hopes, and the future they envisioned. As the snow continued to fall, Katie felt a sense of restlessness creeping into her heart. The isolation of winter weighed heavily upon her, a reminder of her limitations. She had come to terms with her condition, yet the desire to embrace the world outside her window grew stronger. With each passing day, she yearned to feel the crunch of snow beneath her feet, to experience the exhilaration of a winter adventure with Charlie. One evening, as they sat together in the cozy glow of the living room, Katie felt an urgency to break free from the confines of her fears. The warmth of Charlie's presence enveloped her, but the yearning for exploration gnawed at her insides. She wanted to experience the magic of winter, to create memories that would last a lifetime. As she watched the snowflakes tumble gracefully from the sky, an idea began to take shape in her mind. What if they ventured outside, just for a moment, to embrace the beauty of winter together? It would be a small taste of the world beyond her window, a brief escape into the realm of possibility. With a determined heart, Katie reached for her guitar and began to play a soft melody. The notes danced through the air, weaving together a tapestry of warmth and hope. Each strum resonated with her desires, infusing the room with a sense of possibility. Charlie leaned closer, his eyes reflecting the flickering candlelight, and she felt the electricity of his support. As the final chord faded, Katie set down her guitar and turned to Charlie. She could sense his understanding, the unspoken bond that connected them. With a quiet resolve, she took a deep breath and made her intentions known. It was time to embrace the world outside, to feel the snow beneath her feet, even if just for a fleeting moment. That night, as the snow continued to fall, they bundled up in layers of warm clothing. Katie's heart raced with excitement and trepidation as they stepped out into the winter wonderland. The cold air hit her skin, invigorating and refreshing, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she felt alive. The world was transformed into a magical realm, the snow glistening under the pale moonlight. They wandered through the quiet streets, the only sounds being the crunch of snow beneath their boots and the soft whispers of the wind. Each step felt like a victory, a triumph over the fears that had held her captive for so long. Katie reveled in the sensation of the snowflakes landing on her cheeks, the coldness a stark contrast to the warmth of Charlie's hand in hers. Together, they explored the familiar paths of their neighborhood, the landscape appearing foreign and enchanting under the blanket of white. The world felt expansive, filled with endless possibilities and adventures waiting to be discovered. They stumbled upon a small park, the playground covered in snow, transforming the swings and slides into a winter wonderland. In a burst of spontaneity, Charlie led her to the empty swings, and with a playful push, he sent her soaring into the air. Laughter bubbled up inside her, filling her with a sense of joy that felt liberating. The swing set creaked gently as she swung back and forth, the cold air rushing past her face. For a moment, all of her worries dissipated, replaced by the thrill of the moment. She closed her eyes, allowing herself to be swept away by the freedom of the experience, the exhilaration of embracing life in all its forms. As they continued their adventure, they built snowmen together, their laughter echoing through the night. Katie watched as Charlie shaped the snow, crafting a whimsical figure adorned with a crooked carrot nose and mismatched buttons. The playful banter exchanged between them felt like a warm embrace, a reminder of the love they shared, a love that thrived in the midst of challenges. Eventually, they found themselves sitting on a bench, wrapped in each other's warmth as they admired their handiwork. The world around them glowed under the moonlight, the snow shimmering like diamonds. In that moment, Katie felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. She had taken a leap into the unknown, and the beauty of that choice enveloped her like a warm blanket. Yet, as they sat together, a lingering thought danced at the edges of her mind. She knew that this moment, this feeling of liberation, was fleeting. The reality of her condition loomed over her, a constant reminder of the limitations she faced. The darkness of the night felt like a reflection of her fears, creeping in on her sense of happiness. But in Charlie's presence, she felt a flicker of hope ignite within her. Their love was a light that cut through the shadows, a beacon guiding her toward the future she yearned to create. She wanted to believe that even in the face of her challenges, she could carve out a life filled with joy, adventure, and love. As the night wore on and the stars twinkled above them, Katie leaned her head against Charlie's shoulder, her heart swelling with emotion. In this moment of quiet connection, she realized that love was not just a refuge from her struggles, but also a source of strength that could empower her to face whatever lay ahead. As winter settled into a rhythm, Katie and Charlie continued to embrace the beauty of their shared moments. They explored the snowy landscape together, capturing fleeting moments in photographs, each snapshot a testament to their love and resilience. The days were filled with laughter, music, and the warmth of connection, a reminder that life could be rich and beautiful despite the challenges. Katie began to write again, her songs infused with the emotions she had experienced: joy, longing, fear, and hope. The melodies flowed through her, becoming an outlet for the depths of her soul. Each note resonated with her desire to live fully, to embrace the world around her, and to cherish the love that had blossomed between her and Charlie. As the days turned into weeks, the world outside shifted once more. The first signs of spring began to emerge, the snow melting away to reveal the vibrant colors beneath. Crocuses and daffodils pushed through the thawing ground, signaling the promise of new beginnings. Katie felt a sense of anticipation building within her. With each passing day, she could feel the weight of winter lifting, replaced by the energy of renewal. The sunlight, once a distant memory, beckoned to her from beyond her window. It was a reminder that life was cyclical, that after every storm, there was always a promise of light. With the arrival of spring, Katie found herself ready to embrace the world outside her window once more. The days grew longer, the warmth of the sun beckoning her to explore the beauty of the season. She longed to feel the grass beneath her feet, to bask in the sunlight, and to live fully in the moment. One afternoon, as the sun painted the sky in vibrant hues of orange and pink, Katie made a decision. She would step beyond the threshold of her home, into the world she had longed to experience. She wanted to feel the warmth of the sun on her skin, to revel in the beauty of nature, and to savor the moments that life had to offer. Charlie was by her side, his unwavering support a constant source of strength. Together, they ventured into the warmth of the day, their hearts filled with anticipation and hope. The sun enveloped them, bathing them in its golden light, and in that moment, Katie felt a sense of liberation wash over her. As they walked through the blooming park, surrounded by the vibrant colors of spring, Katie realized that she was no longer confined by her fears. She was ready to embrace life in all its complexities, to dance in the sunlight, and to cherish the love that had blossomed between her and Charlie. With each step, she felt the weight of her struggles lift, replaced by a newfound sense of empowerment. The journey ahead would be filled with challenges, but with love as her anchor, she felt ready to face whatever lay beyond the horizon. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, painting the world in hues of gold, Katie knew that she was embarking on a new chapter, one filled with possibility, love, and the beautiful unpredictability of life. In that moment, she felt alive, connected to the world around her, and ready to embrace the light that awaited her.